All right, so I got a new module today that we're going to go into and deals with goal planning. All right, but just before we go there, like I said, that's why I kind of put these other modules in place before we got to goal planning. BEAR module. Why do you think that's important to know before you go into your goal planning? Why is it important to understand the BEAR module?
Like your foundation of who you are, like what kind of goals you're going to be?
Very good. Foundation, right? Because a lot of times people set goals based on with a faulty mindset.
Yeah.
They got those viruses. We have those viruses in our mindset, and you could set some goals, and they could be based on selfish motives, immoral motives, right? And you have a lot of people that do that. Or some people just, you're thinking, well, I just want to make a lot of money. Right? I'm going to do anything to make a lot of money. And what ends up happening? Yeah, they might achieve that goal, but now they're unhappy. Now they're stressed out. Right? Now they're going through a midlife crisis because they got into the job. And a lot of times the people that we see that look very successful, driving the real nice cars and living in the real nice houses, are very unhappy. Because why? Because they went in pursuit for their goal, towards their goal, out of greed or out of insecurity. They might have wanted to be a mechanic, but they said, no, we don't have mechanics in our family. You know, we're a family of doctors and lawyers, right, and bankers. So, because, you know, they let their parents or whoever, or peer pressure, right, rule them, they end up getting pursuing a goal, career that they hate. Now they're mad at themselves for allowing that. I mean, all types of things, Sometimes, I mean, people, like you said, like you just said, this is the foundation that can lead people way off course. And that's why I say that, we have to troubleshoot things in our life, things that have gone wrong, also things that have gone good. Because we have a lot of positive belief processes, right? And we got to build upon those, enhance those. But we have to understand also, like I said, we have to trace back. Sometimes like go backwards, right? When we find out, okay, what led me into this situation? Right? What led me with this behavioral issue? What led me to this type of addiction? And then you backtrack, correct? And that's how, like I said, that's how we're able to find out what the root of the issue is. Because we have to backtrack. I mean, just like you ever call tech support, and what do they ask you? Well, what did you do? What buttons did you press before you got here? Mm-hmm. Well, you got to think back. Well, see, that was your problem. You hit that button. You shouldn't hit that button. You should have left that at its default. Oh, okay. Now switch that back. Right? I got a few more steps and find out what. Now your computer or whatever type of device you have is now working properly. Okay? So this is something that has to be a lifestyle. That's why I say, you take those long walks. Like this morning, I'm just troubleshooting. Okay, what's going on? Let me analyze my belief system. Okay? I'm identifying negative belief systems. Right? Doubt, unbelief. Sometimes you get thoughts of doubt and unbelief. No, I walk by faith. Right? So I'm going to stay positive. Doubting, having a negative mindset is my belief system. That's not an option to have a negative mindset. But that takes conditioning, right? So we have to have something there, set up a lifestyle, set up a climate that is conducive to developing a positive mindset. So, we can have that positive thought process. So now when we go and with the next module, react to situations, we have a positive belief system. I was talking to a young man that had gone through a lot of trouble in his life at UC Davis. I'm a photojournalist. Real bright young man, and got involved in gangs. His mom was able to encourage him. I mean, he had all types of different trials and tribulations, but ended up graduating his senior year with honors. And now he's at UC Davis studying to become a doctor. But we were talking, and I could still tell he might have a little struggle there with his peers, still trying to show that he's down, but at the same time he wants to be positive. He has a real good heart, real good mindset. And he was just telling me, well, there's certain situations where, where people try to test you, and he was just telling me about how certain situations he might have to react. I said, you don't have to react in those type of situations. I said, we need to have the belief system that we don't let other people define who we are, right? Because he's talking about, somebody talks mess to him to show he's not a punk. In certain situations, he's going to have to do something or put that person in their place, physically. And I said, man, you could lose everything that you have here, your whole scholarship and everything like that. We went to Proverbs. I said, a wise man overlooks an insult. A fool is annoyed at once. That became part of my belief system. So guess what? Because I believe that, I don't feel pressured when someone talks mess to me. When somebody's calling me a name. Okay? Because I have the belief system, I don't let them define me. Now, if I give somebody the power to define me, whoever it may be, sometimes people's spouse, they get hurt. Oh, you're this, that, and that. And, people get really hurt and they feel like they got to react. Because what do they say? Hurting people like to hurt people, right? Hurting people hurt people. So, but how do we get hurt? I mean, of course, somebody says something bad to you that you love, that you care about, and they hurt you. Of course, that's going to maybe be hurtful. But at the same time, if we know it's not true, we can't let it define who we are. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's why, like I said, so reacting, we have relax. But like I said, that has to be a lifestyle. Because if you don't have a basically mindset where you could stay relaxed, when trouble comes up, if your mind's not conditioned that way, it's not going to come that easy when a situation happens. That's like entering a martial arts competition and you just read a black belt book. Now you're like, man, I read the whole book. I think I'm ready to compete in that national competition. Right? But you haven't practiced. You haven't conditioned your mind, you haven't conditioned your body for it. But you got the knowledge, you know what to do, but it's not a reflex. So is that going to help you? No. Just like, going back to the bear module, we got to have that belief process, because we know the beliefs dictate our emotions dictate our actions dictate our results. So we take the bear module into the react module. Okay? And we understand we have power, right, when we relax. We understand that our mind flows smoother when we're relaxed. They said the biggest, they did a study on people that take tests. They said when you're stressed and you take a test, you're going to do very poor. I forgot what the percentage was. It's like 30, 40%. You're going to miss answers. Because they said when you're stressed, right, what happens is stops the circulation of your mind. Stops the flow. Okay? People say, oh, I get real stressed before I take a test. Well, what causes stress, when you're about to take a test? A lot of times when we haven't prepared. Correct? Have you ever studied real well for a test, and then when it's test time, you can't wait to take the test? You're excited to take that test, right? Like, I know I'm going to get a good grade on this test. I mean, you might be a little nervous, but you're excited. But when we haven't studied, man, that causes a lot of stress. I mean, it makes you even do worse, because you might have some of the answers, right? But now you're stressed, so some of those, those things in the bank of your mind now are depleted, right? Because of stress. Yes?
I've heard the old adage about classical music, listen to classical music before taking a test. well, I was watching a show about different things about the mind and all that, and they wanted to do an experiment on that theory. And so they had people listen to classical music, or without doing anything, rather. And then they got 3 out of 5 on these little logical questions. And then they did it with classical music, and then asked them some other logical questions, and they got 5 out of 5.
Oh, wow.
And then they tried it with just a guitar player playing.
Yeah.
Some little rips, little,
yeah,
whatever. And then they had them do it again, and they did well again.
Right.
And they determined that it was just relaxing the mind.
Right.
And so, like what you're talking about, stress, you know,
yeah,
you're not going to do well. You relax in some way or another before it, you'll do a lot better.
You know, that's a good point, because one of the best books I've ever read, self-help books, was by Dr. Ben Carson, and he's a world-class neurosurgeon. Okay, African American, grew up getting straight Fs, right? And it's a real good story. There's a book called Gifted Hands, and the mom was working at these wealthy people's house in Detroit, right? And his son is messing up, got an anger problem. I mean, just tearing the school apart. And, you know, one day she just gets a revelation. She's like, what are these kids doing in this wealthy house? Because it seems like they have generation after generation of successful people. And she just started asking questions. And they were just sharing with her, you know, the study habits that they have for the kids. And she was just observing, like, these kids come home, they don't watch TV, they study, they do book reports, you know, even stuff that's not related to their homework. The parents have them, you know, write essays and things like that. So she came home one day and just turned off the TV, and they just all rebelled. She's like, nope, she's going to be able to watch 1 program per week. We're going to go to the library, we're going to turn in 3 reports a week. And they, oh man, they said the kids just rebelled. But after a while, you know, that became the conditioning. Once she stayed firm, and then, I mean, let make a long story short, now this guy was the first individual to be able to separate Siamese twins. You know, the people's, people that are born with their heads connected. And usually when they've always tried to separate them, they die. One of them dies. But he was the first one to separate Siamese twins, and they both lived. Okay? But he plays classical music. He says, you know, he was taught. Yeah, but remember he talked about classical music, and he says he has that playing when he does surgery.
Yeah.
And he said he had, I guess, a neighbor that was very successful and that he really had a lot of respect for, and he would encourage him to listen to classical music. Yeah, right. And he says, man, he just flows when he's in there, and people like all really amazed because he's doing these real intricate, you know, procedures, and like, how does he do that? You know, because you look at the brain, all these little neurons and everything like that, and he got to put those things, take them apart and put them back together. You know, I mean, that's serious. You know, that's pretty intense. So, but yeah, relax. That's one of the key points in the React module. That's the first key point. Yeah, and we said, like, 2, evaluate the situation and focus. And we talk about we got to get information. We got to make it a lifestyle to be learners, right? Constant learning. Because a lot of times people finish high school, finish college, they just, I'm done. I've read my last book, right? I don't need to learn anymore. I paid my dues. No, I mean, no, like I said, life is constant learning. You know, just like with photography. I mean, I finished photography in high school in 1986. You know, went to college, did some photography, but what if I just stopped there? That was before digital cameras, right? That was before Photoshop. I'd be in the Stone Age right now if I didn't continue to keep learning. Same with auto mechanics, right? Even buildings. You know, people want to learn like what you're learning now, solar. You know, what do they call it? Solar renovation and things of that sort, because that's the new trend. You got to stay up with the trends. So we got to be constantly learning. But not only just about careers and vocations, but also about ourselves, personal development. How to handle situations better. I mean, like I said, life skills training on our own, right? I mean, that's why I go to church. Church is kind of like life skills training, correct? I listen to motivational speakers and things like that. And sometimes you get good stuff, sometimes you get stuff, but like I said, you eat the meat, spit out the bones, right? So next, like I said, apply the options and strategies. So as you learn, you apply these things, you know. And like I said, we talked about creating a positive value system. That starts with the BEAR process. Then the C, talk about we got to evaluate things, right? After we make a decision and we take action, we got to troubleshoot it, right? We got to, what do they call it? Debrief. What went well, what didn't go well. You see? And see, then from there, like I said, and even before we make the decision, we could kind of visualize and play things out. Okay, what are the pros and cons of this situation? If I do this, this could happen. If I do that, that could happen. That's a pro, that's a con. And then we take that evaluation and then we do what? T, we take action. Right? But see, the C step is something we do also afterwards, too. Does that make sense? Okay. But now we're moving into, and like I said, I got a pretty good movie with this guy named Dr. Sam Huddleston, and he was sentenced, I think about 18, 19, when he was 19 years of age for a murder. He lived in Atwater, and he got 5 years to life, and he wrote a book called, I'm not sure if you ever had seen the book, called 5 Years to Life. But I had the opportunity to sit down and interview him, and he said, man, he had a lot of good nuggets there that I think we could take with us. But like I said, he's been through a lot now. Like I said, he has a doctorate degree, and he's like second in charge of Assemblies of God Ministries and travels all around the world. But like I said, he pursued his education even when he was incarcerated. He did about 5 years. See, that was back in the day. I mean, for murder, 5 years to life, you know, you don't get that now. But he took advantage of and like I said, his situation was just, you know, being an accomplice, being there, and I guess not really knowing, as he said, what his crime partner was going to do, which many don't. But yet, like I said, had to suffer the same type of consequences. But he talks about how, and he went through a lot when he was incarcerated. You know, some deep stuff, what happened to him. He's pretty transparent. But how he turned that around and was able to recondition his mindset, be able to renew his mindset to achieve success. But here's a module that a mentor of mine taught me that stuck with me, man. And I took this into Department of Corrections as a counselor, and it really helped me, because when I was, you know, pursuing my goals, and still today as I pursue my goals, as I set new goals, I mean, this is one of the foundations that I utilize. Okay, and I remember this individual. He was a millionaire that came into an area which was kind of impoverished, but he would teach these life skill courses or financial classes. He called it financial intelligence classes. Okay, and man, just real positive information, good information. He would teach people how to start a business, how to invest in real estate. And what was real good about it was, you know, for people that didn't have a lot of money, because a lot of times we think when you invest in real estate or you need to start a business, you got to have all this money. But he would show you how you can be successful and be able to start a business, even invest in real estate with a little bit of money, even with no credit and things like that. So he had all these different types of strategies. But this was the main thing that he would speak on before any class. Before he would start the class, he would have everybody repeat this. And we're gonna break each one of these down, and then we're gonna take a break. But he would say S, like I said, this is an acronym for success, right? So this is a success module goal setting acronym, and it was the S was. He would say the first S of success is to select a positive goal. Now, what would you say is a positive goal? Because a lot of people say, you know, well, every goal is positive. No, not every goal is positive. But how do we determine, how do we discern what is a positive goal? Because I could have a positive goal, but it could be positive, like, hey, I want to be a lawyer. And that sounds positive, it's legal and everything like that, but is it really positive?
Depends on your motives.
Exactly. Depends on my motives. Does it align with my conscience? Am I settling? You know, because it just sounds good. And you hear that a lot when I worked at the Department of Corrections. That, you know, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a teacher. And when you really talk to them, they really don't want to be that. They just kind of want to impress you, right? I'm like, no, you don't have to impress me. Show me what you really want to do, right? Because they might say what they really want to do, you know, they might get criticized because they make a lot of money. But it doesn't matter, right? We know that as long as you're doing something that's fulfilling, that and it aligns with your conscience, that's what you want to do. So what is this? What would you say is a positive goal?
To me, to be a good father.
To be a good father. And you know, that's true, because selecting a positive goal, a lot of times we think of just careers, right? Vocations. But that's good, because we want to cover every aspect of life. You know, spiritual goals, right? Physical goals, family goals. So that'd be a family goal. And so when you're setting the success module, because a lot of times when people look at this module, they think just career. Because you ask most people what their goals are. I need to go to college, whoop, whoop, whoop. But there's really no personal development goals. You know, what about I need to work on my anger, be more a calm, you know, positive person. But that's good. See, be a good father, right? So select a positive goal. Okay, that's a positive goal. Another positive goal. What else would be constitute a positive goal? Starting a business, right? But what type of business?
Yeah.
Something that what?
That makes you happy.
Makes you happy.
But I mean, it also makes money.
Makes money, right?
Money does make the world go around.
It helps others along the way. Look at somebody like Simeon, who started a nonprofit to help other people. And
okay, so help. Yeah, okay, so makes money. That's moral, that helps people. Okay, that's a positive goal. Okay, and like you said, when we're setting the success module, we're going to have many different goals. Family goals, right? Personal goals, vocational goals, educational goals, and you got to categorize these things. We're going to talk about next week, how to categorize these type of things. Setting up an action plan for each goal, right? Because they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And like I said, a lot of times people say, well, man, you wrote that book, 360 pages. I could never write a book that big, but it's like, and I used to think like that too, because I used to always just think of 360, oh no, look how thick a book is. I could never write a big, thick book like that. Because I hated reading growing up, I ain't going to lie. It's like somebody got me a book for Christmas, I think I did something wrong to you or something like that. Like, why'd you give me a book, right? But later on, when my thought process changed, I became an avid reader because, especially when I got into photography, I couldn't read enough about photography. And so those type of habits transferred into other courses and things like that. But what I learned is, like, I don't think about writing 360 pages. I think about writing 1 page a day or 2 pages a day. That's not a lot, is it? Now, after 60 days, right? 90 days. There it is there. You're like, wow. Inch by inch, everything's a cinch. Inch by inch, everything's a cinch. How do you walk a mile? 1 step at a time. And see, that's the problem that a lot of people have in their mindset. They look at these big goals and they're like, oh man, that's just too overwhelming. No, you break it up in parts. You look at an automotive assembly line, right? They don't just have 5 people, they got to build the whole car. Can you imagine that? You go work at an automotive company. Well, in this station, you guys are going to build a whole car right from here. No, what do? Everyone does their little part, right?
Right.
Pass on, they do their little part. So even in goal setting, sometimes you got to delegate things. If you're starting a business, you don't design a website. You might not have to learn how to design a website, but you have a brother or a friend that knows how to do websites. You get him to do the website so you can concentrate on other things. right? Now you need somebody to do the logo. You're not an artist. He's an artist, right? You get him to draw the logo. You pass it along the assembly line. Now, certain things you want to learn to do yourself. Okay, so it's, but like you say, you just learning how to bring these things together, break things up. We're going to talk about that. But the next one is you. And you is for unlock negative thinking. So you got to unlock the negative thinking and get it out of your head, right? Because all of us get negative thinking. Daily. Negative thinking is going to attack us daily, right? What is negative thinking? What constitutes negative thinking?
Thinking you can't do it.
Thinking you can't do it. What else? How about anxiety? Stress. You know, we talked about, well, like you say, you can't do it. That's doubt. Frustration. Anger. Bitterness. Selfishness. Depression. Resentment. Depression's a big one. See, all these things cause depression. When people are depressed, they feel unmotivated, right? A lot of them want to sleep. Sleep their day away. It's too overwhelming. Okay? And then these things we talked about in the last class lead to what? Substance abuse sometimes. Right? Irritable behavior. You know, might not do drugs, but then that person's very irritable at home.
Destructive behavior.
Violent, destructive behavior, right? So, I mean, like I say, it's like a domino effect. You got to uproot, right, that negative seed. So, want to unlock negative thinking, but see, once you get the negative thinking out, what do you got to do? You got to put something back in.
Replace it with something.
Yeah, you got to replace it with something. Okay? So, how do you reprogram, how do we keep our mind programmed for positive thinking? How we, basically flesh out the negative thinking. What are some things we can do? What are some applicable solutions that we can do to keep our mind cleansed and motivated and, conditioned for success?
Change your core beliefs.
Change your core beliefs, right. But what are some applicable steps we can do? Like, on a daily basis.
Well, first thing is not to act on our negative thoughts.
Right. Right, but how do we, like I said, keep conditioned like that? Just like if you want to be an athlete. If I say, hey, you want to be a top athlete, a world-class, track star or whatever, I mean, we kind of know what that takes, right? You got to eat right.
Practice.
You got to practice. You got to work out.
So you got to start putting in your mind positive things.
Right.
Reading, being around positive people.
Right.
Even television has positive educational shows on.
You got to give your mind a good workout. Because a lot of times people read, I remember working at the Department of Correction. I'm reading. I'm like, that's good. And you find out what they're reading. I'm like, you really shouldn't be reading this, man. I mean, that's good. You read a lot, but you read a lot of garbage books, right? I mean, if you spent all that time reading like you do, reading something positive, you see? I mean, think how much further you could be along. Especially now when you get out, you'll be that much more ahead of everybody else. And you have some people that read real positive books in there, and they get out, man, they accelerate past people in school. Why? Because, the average kid a lot of time, when they get out of school, they're just playing around, or even college. In college, they just doing all types of extracurricular activities that aren't very productive. But you see I know a lot of individuals that have been incarcerated, and they took that time, and man, they made it very valuable. They got vocational certificates. They read a lot. Some of them, I know some of them that even applied out, side the institution, and had got what do they call that? Those courses that you could bring in, college courses. Yeah. Well, they didn't have online, but you know what I'm talking about. But they were able to apply, and they sent them coursework, and they were able to, get their degrees even when they were incarcerated, or get the information. And then now when they got out, they went to college, they had already read it when they were incarcerated. So the teacher's like, man, how does this guy know all this stuff? Knows more than me, right? So, but like I said, you want to always stay in that mindset of personal development, learning things, setting the environment, you know, conducive to a positive mindset. The music, your association. Remember, association brings along similarities. Have you ever felt really good and then you start hanging around people that are negative? That just have, I mean, not necessarily doing criminal things, but just real negative. They could even have good jobs, but they always have something to complain about. You know, complainers. And that just, it could bring you down if you hang around a person like that all day, correct? Association brings along similarities. So we got to be careful who we hang around. And that's, you know, just like what we watch, what we look at. I mean, even things on our wall. You ever walk in people's houses or in their offices and they have all these positive posters around? You know, maybe positive sayings, you know. Acronyms about, you know, like what we're going over right now, over success or determination or perseverance. You know, those different types of motivational posters. You know, people look at those or see a scripture, you know, a Bible scripture or something with a nice painting or picture depicting what the scripture is about. I mean, those things can keep us motivated, right? Something little like that, which stays in front of us. What do they say? Out of sight, out of mind, right? Okay, the next C is chart your course. Okay, so basically you got to have a plan, because you have a lot of people that have great goals but no plan. I mean, can you imagine if, you know, you're starting a construction company, or you start working for this individual that has a construction company, and, you know, all of a sudden, you know, you meet them at the site and they just dump all this supplies and building material from Home Depot, and they say, we're going to build a house. And I think it's going to be about from here to that tree, and I think we're going to have the bathroom in this area, and we got a toilet somewhere in that pile, and we're going to get a roof. We want the house pretty tall like the one across the street. Right? Now you got all the material. Okay, now, and we got people that, you know, do plumbing and stuff like that. Okay, let's start building. Now, what's missing?
The blueprint.
The blueprint.
Right. The one that brought up early on when you were meeting with us, failed to plan to fail.
Yeah, that's right. Failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people that do that. I mean, they're brilliant, but they never, you know, put out there or develop a blueprint. You know, can you imagine walking to a bank and they say, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to start get some money to build a barber shop. Well, can you tell me about that? Well, it's going to be tight, man. It's going to have, you know, aquariums all over the place. And, man, we're going to have, you know, satellite TV. We're going to have a daycare. It's going to look sharp. Well, where's your plan? Oh, it's right in here. It's right here. I got it all down. I've been thinking about this for like 5-10 years. All I need is the money. I mean, I got some friends, got some hookups, good material, and, man, I got some people that could build websites. Now, you think that person's going to get the loan?
No.
He doesn't have a blueprint. Nothing's charted out, right? Now, if you go in there with a blueprint, a business plan, showing who your competition is, the budget, you know, maybe some analysis of how other businesses are doing in that area, in that region, you know, your system of operations, your goals for that year, and everything else, your background experience and things like that, chances are you might get that loan. They're going to want to look at your credit and everything else. But if you got all your ducks lined up in a row, you might get that loan, correct? Why? Because they see, okay, this person's serious. Because when we don't write our goals down, a lot of times we don't take ourselves serious. Something about writing it down, right? Was that Habakkuk 2:2 in the Bible says, get the vision, write it down. Make it plain. And if I said, hey man, I got a great investment plan, I'm telling you, I got this uncle in LA, and we're going to make a lot of money in some real estate. I know you guys, all I need is like $3,000, man. It's going to be Real cool. We're going to flip that. We're going to get you guys $9,000 probably in about 60 days. Y'all in?
I'd go to jail over that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it could, right. But see, it could be legit, but you're not going to take me serious. And it could happen, but at the same time, if you're wise, you're not going to trust me, right? Because I'm not showing you any type of data, right? And you're not going to take me serious. And you probably won't even take yourself serious. You'd probably be surprised. I'd probably be surprised if you gave me $3,000. Wow, they actually gave me $3,000
for somebody else.
Yeah.
Somebody else and somebody else.
Right.
So you got a lot of money.
There it is.
You're good.
Now, if I'm a good talker, gifted, then it might work to a gullible people,
Right. Yeah.
right? But no, I want to see the, before I invest in a company, I want to see, first of all, is there anything on them at the Better Business Bureau, right? Are any write-ups, any lawsuits taking action against this person, right? Does this person has, a record for real estate fraud or something like that, right? You're going to investigate, okay? So you got to chart your course. You got to write it out, make it plain. Or, like I said, people aren't going to take you serious, and you're not going to take yourself serious. But somehow when you write it down, and we all know that when you write it down and you see it in print, it just takes on a whole new level, right? It's like, man, okay, a whole new dimension when you write it down. Okay, next C is commit yourself. You got to be committed. Consistency builds that, repetition, they say, is the master of all teachers. And like I said, and that's really, to be committed, I'm telling you, the secret is being around committed people. If you're hanging around lazy people that lack motivation, man, it is, like I said, you're swimming against the current. But like I said, I'm hanging around, I make it a point to hang around motivated people that are goal-orientated. Why? Because they hold me accountable. If I'm hanging with them, and I'm not on point, and I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, because we meet up and we talk about our goals. What did you do this week? Well, I just kind of, kicked it, watched Sports Center, and, you know what I'm saying? Just take, it just seemed like, I don't know. Like I said, it just doesn't feel right. It's like, man, I need to step my game up. Here these people are, knocking out, crossing things off their to-do list, and I just wasted a lot of time this week. Right? I don't feel right. Because it's like reverse that peer pressure now. It's like I said, you want positive peer pressure put on you. You see? Because now they're like, man, that's all you did? See, I have friends like that. Man, bro, you got to step your game up. You know what I'm saying? All day you just did that? You didn't do anything else? That's why I tell my 17-year-old daughter, I say, look, at the end of the night, before you go to bed, I want you to do an evaluation. What did you do today to take you one step closer to your goal? Every day. I said, don't take time for granted. Okay? That's one thing you can't get back is time. So don't take it for granted. Make good use of your time. I see say at the Department of Correction, one said, no, you're not wasting your time. You can be very productive here. Right? Reading, praying, whatever you need to do. Work on the personal development. Take advantage of this time that you got here. Right? Because out there you might have been distracted. Now you got time just to get focused. So this could, turn a curse into a blessing. And a lot of people do that. They'll take a curse and turn it into a blessing. God will turn it into a blessing for them. Right? So this is a big one. This is why we need the React module. Okay, we're almost done before we take a break. E, expect problems and difficulties. Now, this is where most people fall apart. Right? Man, I got my goal. It's not fair. Who said life is fair? Life is not going to be fair. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, you got to expect that there's going to be problems and difficulties. And I like to look at problems. I was telling my daughter the other day, I look at them as challenges. I don't look at them as problems. Okay, this is a challenge. I got a challenge. Okay? I mean, just like you got to have the same type of mindset. If you see a football player running down the field and, all of a sudden he sees 3 or 4 defenders trying to tackle him and he just falls down the ground. This is not fair. Why don't they just let me run into the end zone? This is not fair. right? No, that's, you know, he expects that, right? Somebody goes out to war and people shooting at him. What is wrong with them? Well, you know, like I said, you're on the other side. They're on this side. You expect when you go to war, you're going to get shot at, right? That's part of, you know, what happens when you go to war. You know, that's just life. You're always going to have opposition. There's going to be opposition on your job. There's going to be people that are going to hate on you on your job. Some people are going to do unfair things. Some people that are going to act real nice to you, they're going to be stabbing you behind your back. That's just part of life. That's going to happen. Okay? You're going to get bosses that are nice. You're going to get bosses that are jerks. You know, bosses that act fair, bosses that act unfair. That's why you got to have these tools in your toolbox to learn how to react to these type of things. Because some people don't know how to handle that. You know, I used to work on a parole violation dorm, and that was one of the biggest things because they would have an employer that, yeah, maybe did them wrong. They you know, but at the same time, they felt entitled, you know, an entitlement or justification to react on this person, right, in a negative way. Well, because they did this and that. I was like, if you continue to do that, right, now that gives that person more power to justify what they did, even though what they did initially was wrong. You see what I'm saying? You got to have in your toolbox how to react to people who treat you wrongly, right? Who treat you in a negative way, who maybe are prejudiced against you. You got to have all these tools. So that's why a lot of times when we facing trials and tribulations, sometimes those are good things, you know, that God allows. You know, you're dealing with somebody maybe that's racist. You know, somebody that may like I said, there's both ways. It goes both ways. You know, I worked for people that didn't like white people, and they were bosses. They would come against them. So people that didn't like black people. I mean, you're going to find it on both sides. How do you respond to that? What are the proper steps? And that's why I said this is when, you know, we talk about the React module. You got to visualize. Start visualizing situations of people disrespecting you, and then start visualizing yourself giving the proper response. And I used to do that over and over. Even, you know, working at the Department of Correction. Okay, this person disrespects me this way. How can I respond the way I want to respond? And I would play it over and over in my head. And then when those situations would happen, guess what? I was already programmed for it and be like, man, people think that was smooth. Like, how, you know, that man, that you said the right thing at that right time. But see, I'd rehearsed it over and over and over. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it wouldn't work. Then I'd go back and debrief. Okay, what do I need to do differently? But after a while, I started getting a good knack at being able to relate to people and counsel. Whether it was I'm dealing with, you know, a Crip from Compton, a white supremacist, a Satanist. You know, I learned to build a good rapport with all of them, right? And sometimes things wasn't always perfect, but then it was another opportunity for me to learn how to get better at it, right? I mean, just like if you want to be a top basketball player, you don't want to just play against people that are better than, that you're better than, right? If you want to be be better in tennis, you want to play people that you can just beat all day long? What do you want to do? You want to play people that are better than you, right? You want to be, you know, good in martial arts. You want to play people that you can just throw around like rag dolls. Just feel good about yourself. You want to fight people that are better than you, right? I mean, it's an honor to be able to go against people that are better than you in anything.
You're only going to get better with some failings.
There it is.
Challenge yourself.
That's right. Yeah. So if you get a difficult boss, look at it as a challenge. Okay, I'm going to learn how to work with this difficult person the best way I can, right? And if they keep acting up, I'm going to follow the right procedures to get this person removed, right? Because sometimes you got people that do scandalous stuff and, oh, no, this is against policy. So let me learn how to work within the rules to address this situation in the proper way. I'm not going to lose my temper. When they yell at me, I'm just going to email back, keep everything documented. You see? And that way, when it comes to a hearing, they won't have anything on me. Right? They can't say, and I have everything on record. Believe me, I've been in those type of situations where I got a supervisor that was just acting up, and I documented things. They would yell, and they knew they were wrong and lying and everything like that. But, you know, I had to, I would relax because I would want to say something, but I would say, no, I'm going to calm down. I would get, I'd just maybe take a little walk, take a little break, go back, get on the computer, and write what I really wanted to say in a proper professional way. And then guess what? They get mad and respond back on email in a negative way. And guess what? I got a legal document showing how they responded. And a lot of times they would blurt out things that were against policy. So when it came time for the hearing, who do you think won that hearing? Right? Because I learned how to relax. I utilized, these are things that I had utilized myself numerous times. Okay? React module. Okay? So you got it, like I said, look at problems and difficulties. I mean, think about it. The greatest inventions in the world were created out of what? Problems and difficulties, correct? Mm-hmm. I mean, look at the straw. Somebody created a straw. Why? Maybe they're driving, everything was spilling all over them, like, man, there got to be a better way. This is a problem, right? This is a problem. And somebody else was, griping and complaining about the drink spilling on them, but then somebody else probably was sitting in the background saying, let me think about this. What if I could have somebody do the drinking advice, have a top over it, where they could have better control and be able to monitor the amount of fluids going into them just by sipping? Thus the straw was invented. Right? Invention was created, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, a bottle of water. Man, this water, I looked at a news report, man, this water is unclean. This stuff could cause cancer. And somebody was thinking,
Well, that's the thing.
Water device.
Like 30 years ago,
yeah.
Somebody said, if somebody would have said selling water,
yeah.
People would have been laughing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we used to tease people that buy water when it first came out.
Yeah.
We used to think guys were sissies if you bought water.
I mean,
look at that little sissy water.
Like pet rock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but see, people can take problems, and you got a lot of people that become millionaires off other people's problems. You see? So, I mean, they look at it as, oh, man, this is a great opportunity. Correct? You got some people complaining about bullying and everything like that, and other people thinking, let me go talk to some people and create a bullying curriculum, right?
Yeah, it's all opportunity.
And let me go in and teach workshops and be able to help solve the problem, and at the same time, hey, I can make a living out of it and train other people to be anti-bullying facilitators. Right? Same thing I do with the gangs. Right? Get tired of seeing people getting victimized and things like that. I said, okay, do I just want to be, just talk about it? When you're just talking about the problem, you're part of the problem, right? I want to do something. I want to act on it. Okay? Pretty soon I said, you know what? I think I can do this and make a living somebody enjoy. This has become a passion of mine. So I'm taking what other people consider as a problem. Of course, it's a problem, but I can now address this issue. Find the need and fill it, right? Ain't that the success? That's one of the basic success principles in business. Find the need and fill it. What do people need? Cell phones came from what? A need. People in emergency situations. Man, my wife was stuck out all night on a dark road, right? And we didn't know where she was, right? And then thus somebody created AAA, right? Emergency roadside service, all created from problems. Where other people were griping and complaining, other people were saying, let me solve this problem. So problems and difficulties can be our friends. But you got to have a positive mindset to be able to think like that. I mean, nobody likes to see people suffer and go through problems, but at the same time, you can think, okay, I don't want to see this ever happen to somebody again, right? Or I want to have a solution for this type of issue so this doesn't reoccur again, or if it does reoccur, we could have a system which can take them out of this problem. Correct? So, next S is we got to sacrifice, right? There got to be some sacrifice. I mean, I know individuals that wouldn't take certain college courses because and they needed it on Thursday night, but they didn't want to take it on Thursday night because their favorite TV show was on Thursday night. And a lot of people, well, that's my bowling night. Well, I play basketball with the boys that night. Yeah. Well, I know I need to study, but man, I need this. I got to go out and kick it. We go to the clubs on, Fridays and Saturdays. No, there got to be some sacrifice. It's like when you make an investment, it's a sacrifice, right? Taking your hard-earned money, correct? Or skill set, and you're investing for a better return. And that's what we do. That's part of success module. No pain, no gain. Like you go to the gym. You want to get, cut up, right? Or lose weight. It's going to take some pain. And a lot of people don't want to go through the pain. I mean, more than half the people that do gym memberships don't even go to the gym. They pay the gym membership, and they might go once or twice a month.
Yeah, instant results.
And then they sit on a bike, and they feel some pain. I know people like that. I'm so sore, and they think it's a bad thing. I'm like, that's a good thing. Yeah. No, man, this is horrible. I was talking to somebody the other day, was working out. I need to go to the doctor because I'm so sore.
That's the same thing where I live. There's an 18-year-old. We got him to work out with us. That initial sore, that first time.
Yeah.
But that's only that first time. We're trying to tell him.
Yeah.
So, screw that. I'm not doing that again. So once you get that first one over with,
there it is. Yeah.
It takes a few days, but
no pain, no gain, and that's true. A lot of people don't want to hear, and that goes for everything. There's going to be some pain. Those that get married, there's going to be some pain in marriage. There's going to be good things, and there's going to be some pain. Right? You got two people coming together. There's going to be some trials and tribulations in parenting. You're going to have some pain in parenting. Correct? Getting up early in the middle of the night, 2, 3 in the morning, to change some diapers or whatever. Kid might have flu. You got to stay up all night, go to the emergency room. Right? That's going to be painful if you got to get back up at 6 in the morning. But those are the things that they're worth it. Right? Because there's a gain from that. You build a tighter bond. Have you ever been through some trials and tribulations with somebody? Maybe you didn't really even like, but because you've been through those trials and tribulations, there was a bond formed there, right? There's a bond formed.
Respect.
Yeah, respect, right? Like I said, trials and tribulations will bring out the best in people or could bring out the worst in people, right? You can say, man, this person really does have my back. I don't like, it could be a job situation or whatever. But when, things get tough and, the trials come, the people that you thought were your friends bail out. But that person that you thought was a jerk is there with you, right? And then when it's all over, you're like, okay, now the debris clears, you see who really is on your team. Whether it could be, a family situation, whatever have you. I remember, I was the first one of my friends to get a car. Got a job, got me a car. And then, everybody's piling the car, all your homies and stuff like that, right? And they calling you all the time, hey, Ray, what you doing? And all of a sudden your car break down. And then, man, where's the calls at? Now you got to get a few calls, And some of them would get a car. They ain't calling, picking you up. Hey, you need a ride or anything like that. So then I got my car get fixed. And now they want to jump back in my car. A lot of times I'd hide a little basket, gas money. Everybody putting some gas money up in here before this car move, right? So, except maybe for those that I knew that was holding tight. But now I'm saying, okay, I can see you now. I see who you are. Mm-hmm. You see? So the last S before we go on our break is stick to the plan. Okay? Perseverance. And again, that goes back to the bear module, right? I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. One of my favorite self-talk for me comes from Scripture. I walk by faith, not by sight. I walk by faith, not by sight. What does that mean? I'm not going to be determined what I see, even what I hear.
One of the, I can't remember which one it was that said it, but I think it was Peter. One of his that he said, greater the faith of those who haven't seen Jesus than those who have.
Right.
Those exactly that. Those who we're having faith not by seeing.
And see, those are built up in you. Those things you remember, and see, those are things that we draw upon when we go through trials and tribulations. It could be a success story that you read about somebody, right? I mean, that's why I like to watch documentaries of people that have been through tough times, right? Because, like I said, they say if you want to be successful, you emulate the habits of successful people. And one thing that stuck with me is successful people do what unsuccessful people don't want to do. Successful people do what unsuccessful people don't want to do. And when I heard this, one guy, he said, a friend that told me this, he says, I remember he was speaking to some kids, he says, it's easy to do, it's easy to do, but it's easier not to do. You know? It's easy to do, but it's easier not to do. It's basically like, it's easy to just get and do an education, right? Stay in there. I mean, you can do it, but it's easier not to do it. So a lot of times,
couch, but it's easier to sit there on the couch.
Yeah, exactly. So by human nature, a lot of times, we're geared towards comfort, right? Somebody gives us the opportunity to be more comfortable, it's tempting. That's when our self-discipline got to kick in. That's when that personal development got to kick in.
Well, it's just like the whole lifestyle of drinking and using. I mean, it's the easiest for that moment not to do anything, but in the long run, it's just a harder life.
Yeah. Right.
It really is.
Right.
But for that moment, it was like to get clean or to look at the hole we got to dig yourself out of,
right, or
whatever. But it's really easier.
Well, you know what they say: short-term gain, long-term pain. A lot of times, people go for the short-term gain, long-term pain. See, and a lot of people are wired for that because you got a lot of people they know. For example, whether drinking, not trying to pick on people that smoke cigarettes, but it's a short-term gain to get that relax. But that could be, eventually could turn to be some long-term pain.
Yeah.
See? So it's like, that's when we got to, and we all got things that we got to work on, but that's when we got to start that process because it starts in your mind. Right? And you got to weigh out the pros and cons. What can I do? Set up a strategy. Okay? And I tell people, if you want to stop drinking, stop hanging around people that drink. Well, I was going, I went to the house, we were just watching the fight, and the homies are just drinking, and man, the drinks is right there, and fell off the wagon. Okay? Did you have to go to their house? Well, those are their friends. No, you didn't have to go. You made a choice. You should have sacrificed, right? Been committed and sacrificed. But see, a lot of people don't want to do that. Well, come on now. I don't want to be looked at like woo woo woo. Okay, now you're concerned about how other people look at you. Right? Because you know what? You're going to lose friends. When you go after your goals, you're going to lose some friends. Unfortunately, you will. Because not everyone wants to see you succeed. Some people are like crabs in a bucket. When one crab tries to get out, they all try to grab you down. Some people have friends like that. They're cool as long as you're down with them, talking like they talk, doing what they do. And I've seen that even in my own peer group when I was younger. When you try to elevate, now they become like your enemies, backbiting, talking against you. Really? Wow. Like that? If you're just doing nothing like them, now they're your best friend. Oh, yeah, we can relate now. What are you doing going to get a job? What are you doing? What?
Think you're better than us?
Yeah, you think you're better than us? There you go, and making jokes. But really, they're putting you down. But are those really your friends, though? So you got to make your belief process say, okay, no, my friends, just like that. Remember Chief Han was talking about his friends. He said, my friends wanted to see me do good. Your friends aren't going to try to lead you to do things that are bad for you. They're not going to try to enable you in an addiction if they're really your friends. Even if they're involved in addiction, if they really care about you, they're not going to want to see you involved in it. Right? I mean, just like our kids, whatever we got bad habits in a certain area, right? We want to see our kids do better than that, correct? We want to see them do better than that. We don't want to see what, you know, but you have some parents, they bring their kids down. Oh, you think you're better than me? I used to deal with that at Department of Corrections. You know, you talk to some of the parents, you're like, man, now I understand why this kid is this way, you know? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I remember before we end, but I remember this one kid and, you know, had bad attitude problem, and he came in, he was on my caseload. He said, I got to talk to my mom. I said, all right, you know, he was acting like a jerk, but I was like, you know, maybe if you talk to his mom, he'll be better. He's like, man, what's up, blood? You know, he's just talking to her, and I'm like, I got mad. I said, look, I said you could talk to your mom. You playing me, right? He said, what? I said, give me that phone, right? I said, who's this? And it was his mom. And she's talking, what's up? And she's talking all this jive, and I mean, talking all this street. And I just kind of looked at him and looked at her. And I said, I apologize to him. Okay, that is your mom. Okay, my bad. And I said, well, ma'am. And then, you know, I let them get back on the phone, and, you know, they talked their junk about me and hung up. But, you know, from there, I kind of understood. Now I was a little more patient with him. Yeah. Right? Because I said, okay, I understand where he's coming from. And he was telling me that his mom was literally trying to put him back on the street to sell drugs when he got out. So she was like, she wanted him to get out so he can get back to the family drug business. Right. So he broke down. We built a pretty good relationship in there just with rapport. But I was like, man, you know, I started really, okay. You know, and then like I said, and now when he was kind of disrespectful, I had a little more higher tolerance for him. You know? I'm like, okay, this kid was trained in this. You see what I'm saying? So we got, like I said, so I had to get him on the success goal plan and say, okay, well, you need to hang around people that, you know, have mannerisms that you want to have, right? Hold yourself accountable. If you don't want to curse as much, don't hang around people that curse a lot, okay? Because that doesn't look good in employment, right? Or in a relationship. Because, you know, I've seen individuals that they just meet at the coffee shop, and a guy meeting a beautiful woman. I can tell when one of them dating services, you hear them talking, right? And all of a sudden, the conversation's good, doing good. And he's like, hey, man, F that. I told this F. I'm like, and this person got a business suit on. I'm like, oh, man, he just killed the whole dating experience right there. Did you see her? I'm like, wow, you know, what is that? Yeah. You know? He has no clue because he might think that's normal because that's who he hangs around. And then all of a sudden, she's not returning his calls. I can't bring this guy around my kids. And I wouldn't want, if I had kids, I wouldn't want him raising my kids, talking like that. Can't bring him around my mother. Can't take him to a family event. He bust out with some F-bombs and some B-bombs and S-bombs. You know, people going to be looking at me. So, with that, you know, just with that, at the conclusion of that, then we're going to, like I said, when we come back from the break, we're going to just kind of play, we're going to play this documentary. And I might stop in between and we're going to discuss some things because you're going to see in this documentary that he's going to address some of these points. Okay? So I want you to kind of look for some of these acronyms, some of these steps in the documentary we're going to play so we can kind of discuss that. Okay?
On this album, we've been talking about a lot of issues, you know what I'm saying? Issues. But the root to all these issues, bottom line, is sin. It's sin. So on this track, we're going to deal with that. Now in verse number 1, I'm gonna explain what sin is, what it is. Verse number 2, I'm gonna tell you what sin do, what it do. And verse number 3, I'm gonna explain how to be dying to sin, how to defeat it. Let's go. Sin, for instance, is this. It's deception, deceiving.
Choices. What led up to the bad choices, you know, my story is comparable to a lot of people's story. Divorced parents. And some guys, the mom keeps all the kids. In my case, my father kept all the kids. Some cases, when a mother keeps all the kids are, especially the guys, are mad at their dad. In my case, I was mad at my mom. And I allowed that anger and that frustration and just to build up on the inside of me and until it just began to explode. When it began to explode, it began to explode in ways that were not, shall we say, conducive for a healthy community or a healthy me. Got involved in gangs. I got stabbed. run over by a car when I was young. Just a lot of crazy things began to happen, and I got out of control. And institutions are all about guys getting out of control, so I got out of control and got into drugs and just all kind of crazy stuff, and I started making some pretty crazy decisions.
Okay, so you said it was just you had a lot of anger towards your mom.
I did.
How would you outlet that?
Well, first of all, I outlet it. Let me tell you what I found out with drugs. I never liked drugs, even though I took a lot of drugs and sold a lot of drugs. I never liked drugs. I started using drugs. In fact, I started off sniffing glue, and paint, and all kind of crazy stuff. What I found out is when I was high, I didn't concern myself with the present. I didn't concern myself with the pain I was causing anybody else. I didn't concern myself with the pain that I felt, and so I stayed high.
So that helped suppress your conscience.
That's all it did.
A lot of the things that you were doing, and I guess that goes along with a lot of the gang members.
Well, it suppressed the conscience. It suppressed my actions, and I became numb. I became numb to everything around me except my own pain. I didn't care about the pain I caused you or anybody else. I just wrote everybody off. It was all about me at that point. You know, when I realized that pain could be inflicted on somebody and what pain felt like, I decided I was going to be the one inflicting pain rather than the one receiving the pain.
So what was the environment like that you grew up in? Give us a little description.
Well, I grew up in the country, man. You know, Daddy had a little farm out in the country. We raised pigs, chickens, and and all that kind of stuff. I was actually born in Los Angeles. We left when I was young because my father said if we didn't leave L.A., I was going to probably get involved, or he didn't want his boys getting involved in gangs, getting in trouble, going to prison. So I moved to the country, and
how old were you?
I was about 4 when we left L.A.
Right.
So we moved to the country, and I got involved in drugs and gangs and went to prison. But it was a pretty small town, about 3,000 people. But when you're troubled, trouble will follow you everywhere. And I was about 8 when Mom left. My older brother was 9, and my baby sister was I think about 2. And my grandmother eventually she came and helped my father live with us to help my dad raise us.
Well, take me to that first encounter that you had with the criminal lifestyle. I mean, was it a friend of yours, that somebody that befriended you?
No, my first encounter with the law was my brother and I were walking down the street, and there was this car that was dusty, and we wrote our names all over the car. And so the police came to our house that night because when you write your names on a dirty or dusty car, it scratches the paint. Mm. Now, had we known that, we'd have wrote down Ricky, Steve, George, or something else. But, we didn't know. We were kids. And so they came to the house, and I remember my brother was crying. He was sobbing when he saw the cops. And I can still remember, I just stood there looking at him. And they were trying to scare us. They had the owner of the car that was there, and Daddy was there. And they looked at me and said, "What about you? You're just as guilty as your brother is." I said, "Well, I'm sorry I did that too, man. I don't want to go anywhere, But I wasn't that emotional, and I wasn't that scared. And I was just a young, I probably was about maybe 10 years old or what have you at the time, maybe 11, maybe.
So you think that was because you had a lot of coldness in your heart?
It was getting cold. As I look back, I realized, my mom came home at one point and left, and we cried and tried to beg her to stay, and that didn't work. And I remember going out into a field, and I cried, and I said, "No one's ever going to hurt me like that again." And I can take you to the spot where my heart just got cold. And I just totally began to change.
So what type of beliefs were formulated at that point when you said nobody's gonna hurt me again? So,
well, number one, my dad took us to church. So number one, God was out the picture.
Okay.
Don't tell me about a God who can do all these wonderful things and he can't even keep my mom and dad together. Mm-hmm. So my belief system was I still went to church a little bit because I was at home with my dad until I was 13 when I left. But I just said, there's no God. Don't talk to me about God. I don't want to hear about God. So it was just, I don't know what you would call me at the time, but I just was cold and calloused.
Okay, what about towards women, like female teachers?
Well, you know what? I up until the time that happened, my mom and dad used to tell me that I used to bring home notes from the teachers, and they would talk about what a good guy I was, and they hated to transfer me from one grade to the next. So I was a really good kid, but after that, I just changed, and I think I was always somewhat respectful to women, but it came out later when I got married.
Okay.
So,
gotcha. So now take us to that, to high school. The high school years when you really started escalating.
Well, actually, junior high.
Junior high. Okay.
Junior high school. I was walking home from school one day, right, and something inside of me, you know, something inside of me, I felt like God wanted to do something great in my life, but I didn't know it was God. It was just like I felt like there was greatness on my life. That's the only way I can describe it. And again, I can take you to the spot when I was walking home from school. I just felt like there was a big plan for my life. And, you know, my teachers were very positive. They knew the pain we were going through in our home, little town, everybody knew. So they were always encouraging me and all. I didn't want to hear it. I just didn't want to hear it. I wanted my mom back home. I wanted life to be the way I wanted it to be, not the way it was. And I couldn't change it, so I just decided to change everything around me. And so by junior high school, it just started seeping out, man. And when that poison started coming out, it didn't stop till I was locked up in prison. And what happened was this. I didn't just wake up in prison one day. You don't just wake up in trouble. If this was me right here and making choices, reading good books, hanging out with the right crowd, listening to good music, going to the right places, if these were the decisions, going to my right would have helped me to be a really better teen, I made these other decisions. Hung around with a different crowd. Started smoking weed, sniffing glue, all the drinking, alcohol, coming home late, being rebellious, hanging out with gangs and all the rest. So when I woke up in prison, it didn't just happen. There was a series of choices that I made to get me here. Just like if I'd have made different choices, they would have taken me a totally different route.
So what did the junior high scene look like? You know, you rolling through the hall.
I started fighting a lot.
Okay, you started fighting.
I started because by that time, I was getting a little big, and you couldn't say nothing to me, man. I mean, if I didn't like you, we just fought. So I was I was getting in a lot of trouble at school, and it was because of my temper. It was because of my anger, and I didn't want to control it. I just let it get totally out of control.
Okay, so take us to the crime scene.
Well, then in high school, I started packing knives, started packing guns, and selling drugs, all kind of crazy stuff. And so one night, me and two other guys, one of them was a relative, my cousin, we all got high on drugs. We were at a party, ran out of booze, and we decided to go to this liquor store and rob this liquor store. And I had a weapon, gave it to my cousin. And then as we walked into the store, I realized, man, this is crazy. What are we doing? And my grandpa was a deputy sheriff in town, you know, in the county. And so I told my relative, don't do it, man. Don't do it, man. You don't. He said, all right. But what I didn't know was he was high on crystals. I mean, he was in another zone, but I didn't know this. Right. And so, though he said okay, he didn't mean that. So when we got to alcohol, because I could buy alcohol, they thought I was older than I was in this particular liquor store. The guy he was most of the time. He'd been drinking as well, so he didn't really check on our ID cards. Besides, there was a big air base around where I lived, so they just figured we were one of the military guys. And when I turned to walk out, later my cousin said he thought it was a snake trying to bite him. And he stabbed the guy, and before the night was over, the guy died. I was 17 years old, cousin was 23, and there was another guy that was 19. Okay,
so what happened after that scene? When he did that, you know, what happened from there?
We ran out of there. There was another guy in the car. We ran out and got in the car. We went back to the party. 3, 4, 5 hours later, police came to the party. They arrested me, arrested my cousin, because somebody had saw us. They went to the next city, told the cops what they saw. The cops came and got us while they were interviewing me. One of the guards came in. One of the police came in, whispered to the captain's ear. Captain looked at me. It's no longer attempted murder. The guy died on the operating table. I reached for a garbage can, got sick, started puking. I started crying. I said, man, the guy died. Because up until that point, it was all a fog because I was so high. I just stayed high. I was on LSD, mescaline, weed, whatever I could get, red devil, whatever I could get to leave the present world. That's all I did. I just would stay high. And so, but when he said that,
right,
it hit me, my God.
Sobered up.
And I knew then, because any other time I could talk my way out of it or blame somebody, and you know, my family had a good name, and so I knew that I'd go home. But when he said that, I knew I wasn't going home.
So what's going through your head? What are some of the thoughts that are going through your head?
Well, number one, I was scared. I was going, man, I cannot believe I've allowed my life to get this far out of control. You know, and so, you know, when I hear young guys that have done some crazy crimes, and you know, we all want to pretend like we're tougher than we are and all the rest, it hit me. It really, I just realized, man, my life was totally out of control, and I didn't know where this thing was going to go. I didn't know how much time I was going to get. I didn't know anything. You know, it took me probably a week just to sober up with all the drugs and stuff in my system.
So what are the conversations with you and your father like at that point? You know, he's coming to visit you.
My dad came to the county jail, and he looked at me on the other side of that glass. He picked up the phone, he looked at me, and I hadn't lived with my dad about 4 years. And he said, "Son, we're in trouble. I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to make it." And it was in that moment, Ray, that I realized there was a God. It wasn't when I was going to church and hearing all the sermons from the preachers, but it was when my dad was on the other side of that glass, because I had stole from him, lied, cheated, disgraced his name. And in that moment, I realized that the only way any human being could respond the way that Daddy did was if there was a God. And I knew there was a God. I didn't reach out to him in that moment. He was a great witness. He was. I didn't reach out to God in that moment, but I remember the first thought was, there was a God, and he looked at me, and he tried to smile, but I could see the hurt in my father's face. And for the first time in my life, I came to grips with who I was and what I had become. Okay, so the next day, what are you doing? You wake up in your cell. You know, I wake up in my cell, man, and it's just, I'm not even quite sure, because of the nature of the crime, they didn't take me to juvenile hall. So now I'm 17 years old. I'm in county jail. I'm facing a murder, first-degree murder conviction, and you know, I'm scared. I was just really scared. But you don't show that you're scared. I mean, and because I was 17, having in a cell by myself, and then this kept going on, trying to make plea bargains and all those. And eventually, you know, I made a plea bargain. I got sentenced to 5 years to life. And I went to prison, went to Vacaville. So you get sentenced to 5 years of life. What's going through your head at that point? I remember my probation officer. He came, and he came to my cell, and I was sitting on the top bunk, had my feet on the bars, still in the cell by myself. And he started crying. He said, "You could have been this, and you could have been this, and you know, you're one of the best guys I ever had on my probation. You know, whatever you want to, is the guys that he had to work with." And I remember looking at him, I looked him right in the eye, and he goes, "You're going to do at least 7 years. And I remember looking at him saying, and I said these words to him, called him by his name. I said, "Number one, I ain't doing 7 years. I said, I'm not going to escape, but I ain't doing 7 years." And then I looked at him and I said, "And I'm still going to be somebody." And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew there was something inside of me that maybe it was the way my father raised me and the things that he said, the words he spoke over me, but I looked him right in the, and he quit crying. And I looked back and I realized he believed me. Now, I'm not quite sure I even believed it, but I wasn't ready to give up on myself. Some faith welled up. Came from somewhere. But I just realized. Were you reading the Bible after that? No. Not yet. Okay. What happened was, backing up, when I was 16 years old in juvenile hall, I did a bunch of Bible studies, and I gave my dad a Bible. Let me grab this Bible. And in fact, that's a picture of my dad. There's my dad. He passed away a year and a half or so. It's my dad. Me and my dad when I was young. Me and my dad as an older adult. And he really he's my hero. He was my hero, and he still is in many ways. But I was in juvenile hall, Ray, and I did these Bible studies, and they gave me this Bible, this very Bible. And when I got out, because I was locked up on my dad's birthday, I said, "Daddy, I got a gift for you," and it was still in the box. He said, "What is it?" I said, "Well, open it up." So he opens it up, and I was probably high when I gave it to him. And he opens it up and goes, "Man, son, that's a nice Bible. Look at that, King James, and boy, that's a nice Bible." I said, "Well, yeah, Dad, you know, happy belated birthday." He said, "Well, you know, I'm going to save it." I said, "Save it for what?" He said, "I'm going to save it for you." He said, "You're going to preach out of this Bible one day." And I remember looking at him, smile, and going, "Yeah, I hear you." And I walked off. And so when I got to jail, one of the only books they let anybody send you in jail was the Bible. So all of a sudden, I get this Bible back. And then I found out it's the only book you could take with you when you went from jail to prison. So I take this Bible with me. And what I started doing, Ray, if you're in the back, what I started doing was writing down the names. I'd meet guys in prison, and I'd write down their names because they were good dope connections. Man, when I get out, I need to know all these guys. So I started using this Bible since I could take it. And you could see here, you know, I had a whole directory going here, brother. And most of these people here, man, were involved in drugs and everything else. And I wanted to make sure I didn't lose my future contacts. And here's another page. You know, I wasn't taking Bible notes. I was just, all these were notes. And so all of a sudden, I started reading it. You know, I had an aunt.
So what did you start with? You start from the beginning?
You know what? I don't even know, man. I just, you know, I just started reading my Bible, man, and I couldn't understand all the stuff I was reading. But this was after sitting on the yard one night going, you know what, God, I don't believe you exist. I'm tired, but if you do exist, I'm a candidate. Man, I had more Playboy books in my room. I had all kind of crazy books. I got involved with the Muslim brothers. I got involved with Mao Tse-tung. I mean, I was getting involved in some crazy stuff, but I knew about God. I was raised in church. I was baptized when I was 8 years old, but I don't want to deal with God. There has to be another way, man. You know, but I had no peace inside of me. See, the one thing I know, Ray, if a guy's out drinking, drugging, gangbanging, and all the rest, I don't care what he appears on the outside, he has no peace on the inside. And on the inside of me, Ray, I had no peace. Well, I fronted on the outside. In fact, when I was in DVI down in Tracy, I had the best dope connection in the whole prison, man. That's a story in and of itself. And but I still had no peace.
So the drugs would just give you temporary
relief, at best. And I remember one, you know, and my grandfather died while I was in DVI, and for whatever the reason, I think miracle of miracles, and this was back in 1977, I was allowed to go to his funeral. No, 1973. And I went to my grandfather's funeral. For the first time in my life, I looked down at him. And I told my grandfather that who I was. I mean, I didn't tell him who I was, but I said, Daddy Bryce, you're dead, you're gone, and I almost destroyed your name. But I'm going to make a promise to you. I am going to change your name, and I'm going to make it good again. And I made a promise to my grandfather at his funeral. And I went over and I looked at my dad, and man, I'll never forget that day. He was crying, and man, there was nothing I could do. I mean, I had to go back to prison. But I remember looking at my dad, and what I've come to realize in life, that there's very few times in life that really your parents need you. One of them is when their parents die. And when my father died, and my dad, you know, our family is a real hugging, emotional, close family, and they would hug my grandfather, kiss my grandfather. And I mean, my dad, all he did was cry through the whole service, and I couldn't help him. And so I went back to prison. I snuck some weed back in, but I couldn't get high anymore. It just wasn't the same, Ray. It wasn't the same. I gave the weed away, got transferred to another institution, and a friend of mine asked me to go to church with him, and I said, I don't go to church for punks and sissies. I don't go to church. And he kept begging me, and I was on the weight pile working out, and I had weights in the prisons then, and finally he just would leave me alone. So I got up and went to chapel with him. I hadn't been to chapel in years. And I went to chapel with him, and I told him afterwards, I'm going back one day. I said, I'm going to go back with you next Sunday. He said, why? I said, man, the chaplain's wife, man. I said, look at the chaplain's wife. I said, besides, make my dad feel better if he knew I was going to church. And between that Sunday and the next Sunday, I sat on the prison yard and I said, God, I don't believe you exist. But if you do, I'm a candidate for whatever you have to offer. I just need some peace on the inside. For a year and a half, Ray, every night I heard this man beg, don't stab me again, don't stab me again. I'd wake up in my cell just sweating profusely, man. I'd be soaking wet with sweat. And I would just sit on the side of my bed. At the time, they allowed us to have razor blades to shave with. They don't do that anymore either. And I would sit there with a razor blade in my hand thinking, you know what, I can't deal with this, man. I need to end this. I just need to end this. 17 years old in prison. I don't know if I ever get out. You know, in light of what I said at the county jail, now it's reality. Yeah, I'm in prison, man. You know, it's crazy. It's mad. I've never been in a place like this in my life. But I found out this is where they send people who are out of control, and I was out of control.
Now take us to the first day that you entered the prison. You're 17. How was that?
When you get to DVI back then, East Block, West Block, these are like 3-story high cell blocks. And here's control building was right here. So I'm standing here, they're giving me my blankets, some other stuff, and I'm standing here, and in between these cell blocks is this cemented area where guys are playing basketball, dominoes, all kind of stuff, exercising. And I don't know what the look was on my face. But the first thought went through my mind as I stood there was, this is not a career move. This is not a career move. And I heard a voice, one of the guards inside the control unit, he says, it's too late to be scared. And I remember thinking, whatever that look is on my face, I got to change it. And I changed that look on my face They hit a button, this gate popped open. I walked inside, walked over the West Block, showed me my cell and what have you. Ate dinner, lunch, or what, you know, I ate, and then that night I went to bed, and I had a dream. And so I'm dreaming, man. I don't know what the dream was about, but I'm dreaming, and I know that when I wake up, I'm going to be home. And when I woke up, I put my feet on the side of the bed. I still hadn't woke up really quite yet. And my feet hit that cement floor, and it woke me right up, and I realized I was in prison. And it was, you know, here I am, I was 17 years old. I haven't turned 18 yet, man. I'm facing a 5-year to life sentence.
So your first day on the yard, how'd that go?
First day on the yard, man, I didn't really know anybody. So, you know, I met some guys and what have you, but I basically stayed by myself. I just stayed by myself. Within 90 days, they moved me next door. I was put on the main line, and I remember the first day going to the chow hall, riot broke out. And I remember standing up there going, this is insanity. I have 5 years or the rest of my life of this. This is crazy. I'm standing in line, getting ready to get my food, and the two groups, two ethnic groups, they just start fighting, man. They start stabbing each other. And it's like, it was wild. It was crazy. It was insanity.
Now, were they trying to recruit you when you were there?
Yeah, you know what's really crazy? One of the guys asked me to be a part of a gang, and I'd been a leader. So I said, yeah, I'll be a part of the gang. Can I lead it? And the guy looked at me like, he knew then, brother. I didn't know what time it was, you know. And so, you know, but I learned you got to hang out with somebody. You don't make it through prison just being a loner. So there were these guys, San Diego, Ronald Donald Pogue, and there were some others, man, Punchy and Winston, Dirty Red out of San. You know, we just all they became my friends, and especially Ronald and Donald. They were just two incredible young men. They'd done a lot of prison time. They had a brother named Michael, and they said, you know, you remind us of our brother Michael, and we're going to look out for you. And I said, man, I don't need nobody looking out for me, because I didn't know what was in their minds. Right. And they looked at me and said, we know what you're thinking. We came here when we were 16. I said, but that's when we talked, we're going to look out. And they did. They really.
Now, how old were they at that time when they were talking?
When I met them, they were probably about 23. They were in their 20s. They did about 15 years, 13, 14, 15 years.
Are you in touch with them now?
No, I think one of them is deceased. When I got out years later, I was. And one of them, when he was getting ready to get out, because I even got out before they did, got him some clothes and you know, some other stuff. But you know, after I said that prayer that night in the prison yard, you know, my life began to change. You know, I began to read this Bible, began to study.
So how many years was that when you had that prayer in the prison yard?
I was in prison. I'd been in prison about 18 months.
Okay. And so right after that prayer, did you feel something?
No,
or just a peace? Or?
Yeah, I did. From that night to this night, I've never had that nightmare again. I've never had it again, but I had peace. You know, I had peace. Yes, I did.
Now, when you say you didn't have peace, you said there was just an unrest going on. What's going on with you? I mean, describe that. When you say you didn't have a peace, was it a?
But late on at night,
like you wasn't right with God. Or was it?
You know, I wasn't right with myself. So definitely, I wouldn't. You know, I wasn't right with anybody. I wasn't right with myself, with God, anybody around me, man. So and it was like demons, and I really think it was. Man, it was stuff. There was craziness going. I would look at people and see them without their heads, and you know, and for 18 months I used to dream about how I was going to get even with this guy who turned state evidence. It wasn't about, Sam, you were involved in this crime and it's your fault. It was about, I'm going to get even with this dude, man. He shouldn't have said nothing. Code on the street is you get caught, you don't say nothing, and I'm going to get even with him. And you know, and
so you see some supernatural things, you know, in kind of in the demonic realm.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I mean, I had no idea what it was, but it was weird. I mean, I saw stuff, heard stuff, couldn't sleep at night, wake up rustling, tossing and turning, screaming, yelling. You know, guys just, hey,
Did you feel entities? Did you feel entities in the room sometimes?
No,
or?
Man. I don't really know. I just know that it was just a combination of stuff.
Right.
You know, it was like stuff trying to get out of me.
Yeah, just
that's a good word. I was tormented on the inside of me. You know, when you let down people who believe in you. When you let down people who believe in you, man, that's torment in and of itself. Right. And you know, the community I went to and I lived in, my family, parents, you know, and yeah, I was crazy and everybody knew I was crazy, gun packing fool and all the rest. But there was still always somebody who believed in me. My dad always believed in me, and you know, there's always a few other folks that always believed in me, and I just feel bad because I let all these people down. My school, man, I let everybody down, man.
So take us back to that yard. So the day after, or right after you said that prayer, how did things change from that point?
Well, first of all, I started reading the Bible. I just started reading the Bible. And you know what the interesting thing about reading the Bible? I didn't ask God because I had a very bad mouth, and I had a worse temper, and all the stuff I was involved in prison, it don't matter. But I was involved in crazy stuff. It's really a miracle I got out alive. But the more I read the Bible, something started happening to me on the inside. My vocabulary began to change. I didn't say, God help me not to talk a certain way. They said, you know, when you pray, talk to God the way you talk to everybody else. So I just talked to God the way I talk to everybody else. And I used the language that I normally use when I talk to everybody else. But I kept reading the Bible, and I go, man, this is interesting, man. This is, you know, it was like God knew I was reaching out to him, so he was reaching out to me, and things just started making sense. You know, I got to John 3:16, you know, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. And I began to realize that I'm part of the world. God really loved me. And if God loved me, who am I not to love myself? And then something else strategic happened. One day, someone, you can tell, brother, I've used this Bible a lot, but one day they said some professional athletes were coming to the prison, and I said, man, shut up. There's nobody coming to this prison unless they've been sent here by a judge. When in actuality, Fred Biletnikoff and Ben Davidson, they both came to visit the prison. And I remember...
Now, who were they?
They both used to play for the Oakland Raiders. Okay. Earlier this year, Ben Davidson died, and I've had an opportunity to thank both of them for that day. And I told them, you know, this happened so many years ago. You've done so many wonderful things. I'm sure that you won't remember, but it was a day I'll never forget. And I shared with them how they, in different settings in different years, they came to this prison. I don't know what they said. I just remember that Ben Davidson was the biggest human being I'd ever seen in my life. And there was some things about Fred I'll never forget as well. And but I remember going back to my cell that night.
Now, so they were on the yard, or
we had a big gym down in, no, it wasn't no chapel service, brother. No. Not with Ben Davidson and Fred Biletnikoff. No, it wasn't church. But they just came. And the fact that they came to the prison, it spoke volumes to me. And what it said to me was this: I must have worth. I must have value. 2 Oakland Raider players came to see me. I must have worth. I must have value. And that was the genesis of my journey of change. Those 2 guys coming. It wasn't an encounter with God. And this happened before my encounter with God on the prison yard. Right. It was like, if these guys believe in me, they're total. I took it personal. Right. I didn't just sit there thinking, oh, they're talking. No. I felt like they were talking to me. And whatever they were saying, it was coming to me. And they were saying to me, Sam, you have worth. Sam, you have value. It's not over. There's no fat lady. She can't sing. Your life can just begin. You can do something with your life. And I went back to my prison cell saying, you know what? I need change, man. I ain't living like this. I'm not spending my life like this, like an animal in a cage and what have you. I'm not living like this. And so I started looking for ways to change. I started going to school. I finished high school in prison. They said I needed to go to AA. They, you know, the proverbial they. And so I went to AA, and I'd never been to AA, so I saw the program worked. Everybody stood up sooner or later and said, hi, my name is Sam, and I'm an alcoholic. I said, I ain't into this crap. I left, man. I said, I ain't standing up in front of a bunch of strangers and say I'm an alcoholic. So I went to NA, Narcotics Anonymous. Well, I didn't know what that was like. It was the same thing. And guy stood up and said, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a drug addict. And I'm thinking, you ought to get together with the wino and AA. Y'all can go out in the prison yard and tell each other your problems, you know. Then I got involved with the Muslims, and you know, and then I went to church.
Now, how'd that go when you got?
Well, you know what? You know what really was funny was at that time, it was all about the white man. It was his fault and all the rest. Well, even I, as crazed and as insane as I was, realizing there wasn't no white man. My parents aren't white.
Right.
My parents are black. So even then, I knew that they weren't my problem. You know, but I kept going, all the rest. You know, but after a while, I thought, man, I'm not into this either. And I went there for a while. It
wasn't giving you that peace.
It wasn't. I was looking for peace.
Right.
You know, if I thought the white Aryan brothers would have given me some peace, I'd have joined them. I wanted peace. I didn't care how I got it, right, brother, or you know, the one of the Mexican gangs. I just needed some peace on the inside. I knew I couldn't continue living like this. I couldn't sleep at night, man. I was crazy. And I went to church, and some guy stood up and said, you know, I'm a sinner. I need Jesus. I'm going, man, why has everybody got to admit they got a problem? And then I realized, it took me about 18 months to realize that in order to get help, you have to first admit you have a problem. Well, I didn't think I had a problem. I was in prison. They came out of prison, problem solved. But I did have some problems.
So what shined the light on those problems that made you come to a point to where, you know, you're thinking about repenting?
I went back to AA. I went back to NA. I went back to church. And those, see, those, you know, a lot of people, oh, they're just self-help groups. Yeah, and I needed a lot of self-help. Christ gave me the power that I needed. AA and NA gave me the principles that I needed. So as I encompassed these principles, the power from Christ helped me to live out these principles.
Knowledge and wisdom. Huh?
Oh, brother. You know, one time a guy gave me a book to read. Came by my cell. He gave me. I said, "What's it about?" He said, "It's about God, man." I said, "Really?" I was about 19, 18. I don't remember. He says, "Hey, I'm gonna give it to you to read." I said, "All right, man." And I remember I took it, Ray, and I put it on my locker. And as he was leaving, he turned to me and he looked. He said, "Now remember, once you read that book, you're accountable and responsible for what you read." I said, "Yeah, all right, man. I hear you." Ray, that guy came back about a week later. He says to me, "Did you read the book?" I said, "No, man. It's right to where I put it." He said, "Why didn't you read it?" And with all the stupidity I could muster, I said these words: "Because I don't want to be accountable and I don't want to be responsible."
Yeah, that's honesty.
That's stupidity. And honesty. Yeah, you know. And I didn't. I wasn't ready for any of that stuff, man. So he took his book and he said, "Man, I feel sorry for you." And he walked away. And so, and I met a lot of people like that. I wasn't the only one, you know. And so, I just survived. I survived. I was just a few days shy of 5 years, man, in the penitentiary, and got out. And that's when my real challenge began. How do you survive on the outside?
Right.
You know, you live.
So what was that day like? You know, what was the week like before you're about to get released? What was going on? Well,
there was all kind of guys coming at me, trying to get me to get in trouble so I wouldn't go home. It's amazing, brother.
So how'd you avoid that?
You know what? I had some friends that looked out for me, but I also, by that time, guys, you know, they said, "You know what? We just need to leave him alone." But up until the night that I was getting out of prison, the guys, they just play those stupid games.
Right.
You know, get into a fight. Well, now they take your date. You know, do something stupid, plant something on you, and all the rest. And really, by this time, I'd become a pretty strong man of faith, and I just kept saying, "God, you got to help me. You got to help me." One guy came. I mean, it was just crazy stuff. But I just made it through the night. Next day I walked out, and my dad and my brother were out there waiting on me. And even some of the guards came out to another gate and they met me out front, because my father came to visit me so much. And I think the tragedy of a lot of, especially young men in prison, is that we dads, man, we father these kids. And I fathered a kid when I was 16 years old. He's doing great now, but you know, he had to overcome his anger with me. And you know what he told me, Ray? He said, when he was about 13, 14 years of age, he said, I asked him, "Why did you change?" He said, "Because I realized I was making the same stupid choices that you were making." He goes, "I realized I was allowing the pain you inflicted upon me to control my life." And he says, "I realized I was headed down the same path, and I don't want to go down that path." And so, you know, there'll probably be some young kid or somebody watching this, and they're you know, daddy wasn't there, daddy got mama pregnant, daddy left, maybe they don't even know who their daddy is, maybe daddy's dead. But you know what? There's a lot of things we fathers do to our young sons, and sometimes we don't even know the damage we've done to them, Ray. But you know what? My son had to make his own choices. So we're back to that word I said at the beginning, choices. And at 13 years of age, and he was raised, I mean, brother, in the ghetto of Oakland. I mean, he used to run with some guys, you know, Felix Mitchell's nephew, little Daryl, I think his name was. That was my son's best friend. And you know, he became infamous, and you know, I think he's still incarcerated. And I think that was my son's best friend. And I'd probably seen him when I went to go pick up my son, but I didn't know who he was. And eventually he came and he moved in with us and stayed with us. But he made his own choices. So even though life is crazy, mom ain't there, dad ain't there, you know, you're staying, but it's full of choices. And God has given us enough power on the inside to make right choices if we choose to.
So you're getting out of prison. Now you still, like you say, you still have that coldness. Now did Christ take that coldness away that you had towards your mom?
Yeah, well, that took yeah. That's a journey in itself.
And what happened with that relationship?
Well, it got better when I got married. I got out. I was out about 90 days, and I got married. And I was not a nice, you know.
Now, did you meet your wife while you were incarcerated?
No, I didn't know my wife. She didn't know me. My wife was a good girl. I jokingly tell her, I don't know what you did wrong as a little girl, but it was something bad to end up with me. You should have repented, and God would have let you marry, you know, whatever. But anyway, but I realized that I was angry. And my wife used to tell me not long after we were married, "You need to get some help." What do you mean help? Oh, you think I need to go see a counselor? Oh, so you think I'm crazy, don't you? She goes, I didn't say that, huh? No, you think I'm crazy, don't you? Well, I didn't say that. Oh, I ain't going to see no counselor. I ain't crazy. And so this went on for maybe a couple of years, and finally one morning I woke up and she was gone with my kids. And I remember thinking, oh, she meant change. She meant she wasn't going to put up with this craziness. And I did. I went to go call up a counselor. I said, I'm not coming to your office, because if anybody sees me coming to your office, they don't think I'm crazy, and I ain't crazy. I said, however, I will meet you around the corner from your office in the park. Ray, I was so concerned about people seeing me and going into this counselor's office thinking I was crazy, that it never dawned on me what they must have thought when they drove by the park and saw this white guy and this black guy in a swing, both of us in two different swings talking. But they didn't think I was crazy, bro, okay? I didn't care what else they thought. They think I was crazy. And at one point, I just had to go talk to my mother. And my dad had prepared me for that day. And I just had to get rid of this anger. And so I went to tell my mother off. What ended up coming out was, Mom, please forgive me. She said, forgive you for what? I said, I should have been a better son. I made your grandmother wait too soon. And I just started going through, I don't know where it came from, because I had driven 2 hours, brother, to let all this poison out of me. Well, the poison did come out, but it just came out in a healthy manner.
Came out in love. Huh?
And instead of building, because I began to realize, if God could love me with all the junk that I had done, the least I could do is give that love to my mother. And I began to cry. She held me in her arms and I cried. And I was uncomfortable because, my dad could hug me and that was fine, but Mama hugging me, man, we didn't have that kind of, wasn't that kind of a party, okay? But through the years, we've become very, very, very close. There's been a lot of healing between my mother and I. And when my stepfather died, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I went down, stayed with my mom, and helped her to take care of all of her business. And I remember she looked at me, she says, you really love me, don't you? I said, I do, Mama. But God had really done some healing in my life. What I realized, Ray, was when I was a kid, I was hurt. There's not a man, woman, boy, or girl, in juvenile hall, prison, whatever, that hasn't been hurt. And now in order to get to those facilities, we've had to hurt a lot of other people. If I had dealt with my hurt over here, I would have never ended up over here. And then, I got out of prison and I needed a job. So I wanted to go to college. I didn't want to go to college to be anything except get a good education so I could get a good job. Very few people wanted to hire somebody who could sell drugs, who could rob, who could steal, who could make babies. I needed an education. So I went to college, graduated with a bachelor's degree, and you know what? Every class that I took, I realized it was, man, I felt good. It did something inside of me, so I took another class. In fact, someone asked me one day.
Why did it make you feel so good?
Because all of a sudden, man, I felt valued. I felt like I was doing something to help me and to help other people in the future and what have you. I realized my wife was smiling at me, my parents were smiling, my cousins and different people were proud of me, man, because, man, look at Sammy, he's going to college. And I like that. I like people looking up to me rather than looking down to me. And someone asked me once, man, how did you do 5 years in prison? I said, day at a time. And they said, well, how did you? And then someone else asked me another time, how did you end up graduating from college? I said, class at a time. So it all happens one day at a time, one step at a time. It happens with choices. That's what got me where I was at. Then I left there. And
you said the Word of God helped you to make the right choices, taught you wisdom.
Without the Word, the Word of God, the Word of God changed my mind. My mind was mush. Ray, I had drunk and utilized so much alcohol, so many drugs. My mind was mush. I remember standing on the prison yard looking at guys, listening to them talk, and when they got done, they said, well, what's up, man? Well, what do you think about what we just said? I said, what'd you say? They said, the conversation we just had. And I said, you were talking to me? And they would look at me and say, man, what's wrong with you? And I was gone, man. And I remember that night on the prison yard, I said, God, if you would give me my mind back, I'll never put another drug in there. And I haven't.
So Christ renewed your mind.
He renewed my mind.
That's an important point, because a lot of times when we go out and we go, doing our counseling into prisons and things like that, some of these young men look discouraged and they're saying, I'm burnt. So I've done too many drugs. So you're saying that there's hope for that type of individual.
This book right here, I began to read this book. I began to ask God to change my life. I began to ask God to give me a new mind, give me a new brain. The Bible says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The Bible says he'll keep me in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on me because you trust in me. And I begin to memorize scripture. And I'm telling you, Ray, I'm a witness today. I didn't just go to earn a bachelor's, I earned a master's, and eventually I earned a doctorate degree. I've met with the President of the United States. You know, you can do a panoramic view of my office. I now oversee over 460 churches, 170, some of them report to my office. I travel all over the world. Last year alone, my wife and I spent 6 weeks on a sabbatical. We went to Spain. We spent 3 weeks in Spain. We went down to Costa Rica. We spent 5 weeks in Costa Rica. I've been to the Philippines. I mean, I've been all over the world. Literally, I don't know how many different countries in Africa I've been. Turkey, spent 12 days in Turkey, just been all over the world. But it started, Ray. The most important thing is it started in prison. Because in prison, that's where my change began. And you asked me at the beginning, how did I get in trouble? My son asked me that question one day. I'm going to tell you how I got in trouble. It's because people will say, you don't listen, you don't. No, I did listen. I listened to the older guys who were trying to give me advice, whether it was the school principal, whether it was the dean of students, whether it was my dad, whether it was an uncle, whether it was a cousin. I even had friends who would smoke dope with me and said, man, why do you smoke dope like us? You don't even like it. Man, shut up. Who do you think you're talking to? So I listened to everybody. There's not a human being on this planet they can hear that doesn't listen as intently as everybody. They hear what you're saying. Parents, if a parent sees this, your child hears what you're saying, but here's what we all have in common. And then they just go out and do what they want to do. So,
yeah, so why is it, you know, like you said, you know, our ministries, ThugExposed.Org, we expose the thug culture. What would you say would be the reason why so many of these young people are so attracted to the gangster and the thug culture? Even these young ladies, I get parents asking me, why does my son want to grow up and be a gangster, and why does my daughter want to grow up and marry one?
Because it's perceived acceptance. See, it's a culture. There's a culture. When I was out there in that gang world, man, listen, I knew who had my back, and literally, it's sad, but these guys would die for me, and me for them, brother. I mean, it's like, it's something that, it's a family environment that you can't describe any other way except it's just family. And it was odd for me because I had a good family. Grandfather was involved in my life, and uncles and cousins. But that gang thing, man, plus it fed something inside. It fed that wild side, man. Man, listen, it fed that wild side of me. It helped me inflict pain on others that I felt like had been inflicted upon me. And so, as I said earlier, I listened to these older guys, and I did what I did. I didn't listen. I listened to two groups of older guys. There was an older group of guys that tried to give me some wisdom and keep me out of trouble. I didn't listen to them. I heard what they said, but this other group I listened to, they said, man, do this, and I did what they did. I ended up in prison. If you look around this office, you'll find that there's a bunch of pictures on my wall. Those were the other older guys that used to speak into my life. I listened to them as well. I did what they told me to do. For instance, when I got to college, I started a semester late, and I had a professor friend, and I told him that I wanted to graduate with the class that I came in late with, which meant I'd have to finish college in 3.5 years. He said, what's your major? I told him my major. He says, come back and see me in 2 or 3 days. I came back. He had taken every class that I needed to take in 3.5 years, Ray, and showed me if I followed this plan that he had laid out, I would graduate in 3.5 years. Now here's the miracle. I did what he told me. Here's the second miracle. What do you think happened in 3.5 years? Isn't that a miracle? I just did what somebody. Man. So what I'm saying is, if the people will tell us and help us, but after a while, people will quit trying to talk to us if they don't think you're listening. And so there came a point where people no longer were trying to give me advice. People were now controlling my life.
So what nugget would you leave with our audience for these young people, you know, that are trying to find their way in this world with all the temptations coming their way? You know, what last piece of advice would you leave for them?
Your life can change the moment you take responsibility for it.
Amen. Dr. Huddleston, show us a little bit about your book.
Well, I've written 2 books. And the first book is a chronicle of my life. It's called 5 Years to Life. And one of the guys who endorsed it said the story of a wayward son and his father's relentless love. on the back is a picture of my family, man. You know, that's my crew, and I now have 13 grandbabies, and our children. We have 2 sons, 2 married sons, and a daughter who are all married. And I don't just talk about a bad boy becoming good. My wife says I'm still a bad boy trying to become good. What I talk about are all the people that helped me along the journey. You know, one writer used to say these words: whenever you see a turtle on top of a fence post, you know he had help getting there. I'm a turtle. And I'm sitting awful high on the fence post, and I've had a lot of help getting there.
So what do you think about that?
Good stuff.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of good nuggets in that, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, he was laying out that bear process, I mean, pretty transparent at the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, his views towards women. What were some other views that he had that you see in the bear process? What are some of the core beliefs that he had growing up that were developed at a young age?
He was cold. I mean, even at 10 or 11 years old, he was cold.
Right.
I mean, like he said, when he first got in trouble with the cops came over, he was like, man, it's no big deal.
Right.
He was really hardened up to, you know, like, this is no big deal.
And why was that caused? What do you say caused that?
His mom had left him in his life, so that probably didn't help his feeling of, she's not willing to be part of my life. You know, what's life worth without one of my, you know, strong parents, you know, to
Right.
lead me. There was that heavy impact.
And he said even about going to church, he said, well, what type of God would take my parents away, right? Or, you know, separate, break the family up. So he had a negative view of church. And then also he said about the pain that was coming into him, right? And he said, instead of saying, you know, I don't want anybody else to be the recipient of the pain I received, he wanted to do what with the pain that? Yeah, he wanted to inflict pain onto other people. That made him feel good. And he found that gangs fed that, right? Because he gave, what do you say, he fed his wild side. So it helped him to...
Make him forget about the reality of the day.
The one to get
Right.
escape reality all the time.
Right. And he said even in his marriage, you know, the relationship he had with his mom, he said he'd be respectful to, you know, female staff and teachers throughout school, but he said it really came out when what happened? He said that, you know, his issues with women came out when he got married. He said when he got married, that's when it really came out. Because like I said, he had that belief system that was, you know, ingrained in him when his mother left him at a young age. But he said his father, you know, but he said when his cart started kind of breaking that shell off was when he seen his father when he visited him in prison. And what did he say? He said he seen, what did he say he saw when he looked at his father?
The sadness.
The sadness.
A smile with us behind it was a sadness.
Right.
Yeah. He was going to stick by him and back him up, but
Yeah.
he was going to get better, and he felt that, you know, he'd be out someday, but...
Right. We seen his father's unconditional love.
Yeah.
And he said that in itself, right, really impacted him.
Yeah.
He said, man, I was able to see God's love through that before, you know, he rejected God, but just through his father that, you know, and he seen also the pain. I guess it came to reality how much pain he had inflicted on his father. But his father still had that unconditional love for him, and then that was pretty deep when they allowed him to leave the prison to go to his grandfather's funeral. He said, you know, that's one of the times when your parents really need you, when they lose a parent.
Yeah, that was a healthy pain.
Yes.
He was able to have to go through, but it was healthy for him because it helped him realize things that he was doing that were affecting his father, and what if he lost his father?
Right.
And lost his father without getting reconnected with him.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
Right.
So he took all that pain back to prison with him, and that probably helped him change his viewpoint on life a lot.
Right. And you know what I think interesting, like I said, he had kind of a double mind, you know, double belief system, because he said even if after he got sentenced, you know, he said I guess his former probation officer was crying, you're going to do at least 7 years. And he said with confidence out of nowhere, I guess, he says, I'm not going to do 7 years. And I'm going to be somebody. Now, where do you think that came from? He said, well, I don't know where it came from, but where do you think that came from?
His father. His
Yeah.
father.
Right. The value system. So see how important that is, you know, for us to lay down the foundation in our own families, you know. Because like you say, even if a kid gears off, you know, there's a scripture about that, right? Raise a child in the way he should go, because when he gets older, he won't depart from it. If he does depart from it, he'll come back, right? And seems to see what happened to him, because you see that in different situations where all this negativity, but then out of nowhere, you know, the positivity comes out, right? And overshadows that negativity and then kind of compels him to go into the right direction.
I could relate to him when he was talking about how he was raised with all this religious aspect to
Right.
it, but he kind of shunned it off when he was a youth.
Right.
It wasn't really impactful. He heard the sermons, but they just weren't really there.
Right.
But they were still ingrained there a little bit with morality and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he was able to turn his life around to God, all that was able to, you know, what he learned about as a youth was really now, you know, there was already some stuff there ingrained in him that,
Yeah.
you know, and I totally related to that because, you know, I did the same thing of just kind of rejecting God, even though I was religious growing up as a youth. And
Right.
moved off and did my own thing and totally turned my life away from God.
Mm-hmm.
And
But see, what was in you, though, later came back up,
yeah.
you know. And, you know, also looking at the drugs. I mean, we could look at different angles on that, what led him to the drugs, and why did he initially say he took the drugs?
To escape.
To escape. There it is. And he said when he was on those drugs, he said at best, you know, it kind of numbed the pain, right? And but then, like I said, as we talked about before, the domino effect, right? When you don't deal with your issues and you run for that escape, drugs is that easy escape. And like I said, we don't deal with that belief process. But see, later on, as he's doing his time in prison, right, he begins to learn to deal with that belief process, right? He said it starts, you know, within the mind. But he was being, you know, tormented. And like I said, he said he would even had joined the Aryan Brotherhood if it would have brought him some peace. Now that's pretty desperate for an African American want to join the Aryan Brotherhood just for peace.
Yeah, whatever extreme it takes to find that inner peace.
Yeah.
That's how he was feeling. That's that low. And it's interesting how, you know, that's how sometimes you can achieve great things is hitting rock bottom.
Yeah, and, you know, and when he was saying that, I'm thinking back, I had this guy on my caseload. He was a Native American, kind of a dark-skinned Native American, right? And I remember we used to put their gang names on the door. And I come in on the unit, and I see a new intake, and it says SWP, right? And that's, you know, Supreme White Power Gang. And it's on this Native American's door, right? And I found out this is my caseload. So I'm thinking one of the staff, you know, putting forth out a joke or something, right? So I'm kind of cracking up, and I take the slip off. I said, look what they wrote here. And he's looking, hey, put that back, you know. And I'm like, hold on. I'm like, this is Supreme White Power, right? White supremacist gang. Obviously, you're not white. And he looks at me, you know, he looks at me. He says, well, I am. That is my gang. That's who I represent. I'm like, you're Native American. I just looked at your file, you know. I said, how do you become a white supremacist Native American? And he says, well, you know, he's from Chowchilla. He said, well, I can't. We have to go through a ritual where we, you know, renounce our race. We got to put down a race. He said, we have African Americans that are, you know, in our gang. I said, you have African Americans in Chowchilla that are white supremacists. He said, yeah. He says, and they're more zealous and they're out there doing more things than a lot of the white guys. I'm like, so they have to renounce their gang, their race too. They say, yes. But why would somebody be willing to do that? I mean, here he was, talking like that, maybe just joking or whatever, but there are real people that do that. I mean, obviously, there was a need in their life to where they would go to that extreme where you have African Americans in Chowchilla, California that are becoming white supremacists. I mean, there's even a parody done on that, I think, by Dave Chappelle or something like that, I hear. Yeah, I heard that he did something on that. But that's a real thing that I encountered years ago, right? But that's how sometimes desperate people will get. And we were talking about that earlier, just for drugs, just to get that escape, or cigarettes or whatever it is. The people will do the short-term gain, right? And be willing to accept the long-term pain. So I thought that was, real interesting just about the drugs. So we said, he took the drugs for the escape, right? But we see also that those were the fruition, from those negative beliefs that were sowed into him from early on. Just getting into the gangs, things of that sort. Like I said, the hardening process of the heart. And where you just don't care, right? And that's a dangerous person is a person that doesn't care, because not only usually they don't care about themselves, it's easier for them not to care about anybody else. Now, when he's talking about the goal setting, let's get into that, because that's, like you said, we talked about the modules, the React module, and we see that in place. Dealing with some of the temptations that he was facing, keeping his mind conditioned to be positive. Because what we just talked about earlier, he said even to the last day, to that last night, people were trying to set him up so he would not go home. And that doesn't just happen in prison, that happens even in free society.
The day before I went home.
What was that?
I was getting tattoos on my legs the day before.
And why were you getting tattoos on your leg? What was going through your process?
Just, gang related.
Gang related tattoos, right?
No,
so
they're not gang. Well, the tattoos aren't. They're Native American. But,
right.
I'm in prison. I ran an IP.
Right.
And,
now, how did you feel when you first got released from prison? What was that feeling like in the first time?
The first time?
Yeah, because you had done a pretty long amount of years, right? The first time, correct?
Well, I did YA time first.
Right.
Yeah.
And how long was that?
4 years.
4 years. And that's a long time when you're a youth.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 years is a long, 2 years a long time as a youth. Is a long time.
Glen Hall.
Right.
Always closed.
Yeah. And I know that's like the little kid hall when they first come in there.
They called the Young Boys Program.
Yes.
And I went from there to Butte.
Right.
That was the Madhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And from there I went to Carl Holden and then Preston, and then I actually got kicked out of Preston, right, which you're not really supposed to be able to do. But I did.
Right.
They sent me to DeWitt.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, how can you relate to his story?
Just the madness.
What things did you see that say, you know what, I could identify with that?
The acting out, you're real young.
Right.
Because I came from a single. My mother took us, right?
Right.
My mother and my father. My father was abusive, and he beat me pretty bad when I was 6. So I really. I still to this day have resentments towards my father. Right?
Is he still alive?
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. If I ran face to face with him, I'm
you said this is your stepfather. This is your stepfather, right?
No.
Your real father.
Yeah,
okay.
This is my father. They came out later on that he had molested my sister. Right.
So that just compounded, your anger towards him.
The anger issues, and I acted out real young. After that, because he beat me for stealing a lawnmower that someone had gave us.
Oh wow.
And he was.
So some you didn't even steal.
Yeah, he was an alcoholic. And like he said, in the small population town.
Right.
You know, I stayed in Westwood by Susanville, and the population there was like 1,500. You know, and like,
so everybody knew everybody.
Everybody knew everybody, and I was real prejudiced growing up.
Right.
Because I'm Native American, right? And the town was predominantly white, and so the kids used to pick on us when we was kids. You know,
right.
Because we had long hair or whatever, you know, and,
right.
and we're not white.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of factors growing up.
Yeah.
That made me,
so you had all these different world views, you know, negative world views about people.
Yeah.
Well, from negative experiences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I started stealing at a young age, and I didn't have nowhere to get rid of it. I'd break in people's houses and take their jewelry and stuff, and I'd bury it up there. I mean, if you went up there with a metal detector up in the woods, you'd probably find all kinds of shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really,
so your attitude was like you just didn't care. Yeah. You felt devalued. You felt like you didn't have value. Did your mom make you feel like you had value?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of helped, but at the same time, it means a lot for a boy, a young boy, when the father doesn't show value to him, because that kind of confirms. We always kind of look to our father to confirm our manhood, right? To endorse it.
Yeah.
And when you have, a male figure or your father that does just the opposite, that's painful.
Yeah. My stepdad, he didn't know how to raise kids.
Right.
He
didn't show you any value.
No. Like he was like. I met Sonny when I was a kid. There was a ballpark, and he used to work there, right? And I used to go down there after school, and he would throw balls with me, right?
Right.
Catch.
Now, who's this, Sonny?
Yeah.
This is
my stepfather.
Stepfather,
he
okay.
ended up being my stepfather.
Right. So he was cool initially.
Yeah, initially he was cool, and my mom asked me, "Well, what are you doing after school?" I said, "I'm playing ball with my friend." And she said one day, "Well, why don't you bring him home for dinner?" So I did.
Right.
Needless to say, 2 kids after that, you know what I mean? They got married,
So you think it's going to be a great thing?
Yeah.
Because it's like, hey, I married my mom is marrying my older friend.
But he didn't know how to raise kids either. He's Portuguese, full-blooded Portuguese.
Right.
And they have real bad tempers, and I couldn't stand his mom.
Right.
His mom was one of them old ladies like to pinch you on the cheek, and all that stuff, and I wasn't into being touched after my dad had beat me, you know what I'm saying? So I had a real bad thing about people touching me.
Right.
And so that led to some problems. And I acted out. I acted out all the time. Yeah.
Then we say acting out, like what would you do?
Like my next door neighbor had a motorcycle, right? A little RM50, and I asked him to ride it, and he told me no. So I waited until they went to Reno for the weekend, and I took it.
So what was your mindset about acting out? Was it like, I'm just going to, like for him, Dr. Huddleston, he was saying, when I receive pain, I want to inflict pain.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the inflictor. I don't want to be the recipient of it. Did you have that same kind of feeling, like you want to be in control?
Yeah.
So it's like before I let people take control over me, I'm going to be the controller.
Yeah.
Before I become a victim, I want to be a victimizer.
My dad denied me so much when he was in the house.
Right.
Now that he's gone, I'm not going to be denied what I want.
Oh, okay. Say that again?
Yeah. Since my dad denied us when he was in the house, right?
Yeah.
After he left, I was not being denied nothing anymore.
And see, that's a barrier system. That was your belief system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that domino affected all types of areas of your life.
Everything.
And so you don't care when we don't care because, like I said, a lot of times if you don't feel valued, right, a lot of times, naturally, a lot of people don't care.
Yeah.
Right? When you have old things around the house you don't really care about, if you don't care about them, you're not going to really care too much. You're willing to toss them out or give them to Goodwill and things like that. Same thing.
I'd
people
away.
Could feel like that. Yeah.
I'd run away all the time. Stay out in the woods overnight. I built forts out there.
And use drugs?
And
did you use drugs?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
But it was kind of an easy transition to use drugs because you didn't care.
Well, when I got to the bigger city, right, to Marysville,
yes,
we moved from there to Marysville, and I started smoking a lot of weed, taking pills. Back then, it was the cross tops and black ladies, and I was only like, I think 10,
right,
10 years old.
And it was really nobody there saying, "Hey, don't do that," or having those talks with you.
No, the people I hung around was.
Did you have family members that talk with you about don't do drugs or anything like that?
See, my mom, and my stepdad.
Right.
And me and my stepdad grew pot in the garden.
So he kind of endorsed that lifestyle, You know, just by living by example of, okay, he tolerated it. Now he tolerated it.
He did it. I do it.
He embraced it.
And the people I hung around, right?
So if you came home drunk or you came home high, what would be the response?
If it was my mom, I'd get my ass whooped with a wooden spoon.
Right.
You know what I mean? But most of the time, I just laugh at her. You know what I mean? Because it really, if you're high, it's not going to hurt anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I get sent to my room, you know, get grounded or something.
Now, did you resent her in a way for the way your stepfather treated you? Like, hey, mom, you need to step in and you know, check your husband for the way he's treating me. Did you ever blame her for, you know, your treatment, how you were treated?
He wasn't a good father. You know what I mean? I knew from
okay.
You know.
So you were able to process that.
Yeah, I knew he wasn't a good father even young, because I mean I watched other people's parents. You know what I mean? And I seen how they were. So give me an example. Why wasn't he a good father? He didn't know how to. He didn't have no parenting skills.
Right.
You know what I mean? He didn't talk to you. You know what I mean? His thing was
he didn't talk to you.
My mom collected welfare, right?
Right.
He basically just ran the money.
Right.
You know what I mean? Did whatever he wanted to do.
Didn't work?
No.
Okay.
Every once in a blue moon, he'd get a little job for a minute. You know what I mean? And that was that.
So he didn't really teach any work ethic?
No, he didn't teach us nothing. You know? I was 9 years old. We was living in Westwood. I ended up stealing a cop car, right? Because I was taught to drive at a early age by my father. And I got busted by the cop who owned it 4 hours later, right? Didn't put a scratch on this dude's car. I was proud of that one. You know what I mean? Right. They didn't have juvenile hall back then, so I went to a county jail. And they stuck me in a single cell with a shower and a sink and a bathroom in it, and it was right next to the tank. And everybody used to think that it was cool for me to be in there at 9 years old, right? Wow. So that kind of gave me that outlook of going to jail is cool. You know
wow.
I mean? And
so when you got out, people kind of pat you on the back.
Well, like, I went from there. I went to a foster home, right? And I went through 3 foster homes in 9 months.
Oh wow!
Yeah, because I was always acting out. You know what I mean? I was doing things I wasn't supposed to. My mom talked to the judges and said that she was going to move out of county. That's what got me out of the foster homes. Right. That's fun, the county.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, interesting. So, now, how about anybody else? Were you able to see some things in this?
I don't know. Can you want to check on the side over there?
Yeah. Were you able to see anything in this story that you could relate to? Now, you pointed out that you said, okay, I was raised with good values and morals and things like that, kind of geared off, but yet later on, these things surfaced back up in your life and had an impact on you, a delayed impact. Yeah. And led you back onto the right track.
Oh, taxi?
Right? So that's good.
Like 8:10. So.
Okay. Now about the goal planning part, real quick, we're going to kind of, in conclusion, this guy went and, like I said, achieved a doctorate degree.
Yeah.
Okay?
And what? And was it religion?
Well, he said he got his BA degree. And I think later on he went for the religion, but initially he got a BA degree. I don't know what he got his BA degree in, but he was talking about, that took a lot of perseverance. I mean, all the things he had been through, and he started laying out that plan. And he said, what did he say? He said, I started listening. He had 2 groups of people that he was listening to.
Wise ones that were giving him good advice.
And some that were giving him bad advice. He said, once I started listening to people that gave me the good advice, he said, guess what? It worked. Yeah, it started working.
It's like he said he didn't understand about NA and AA, right?
Right.
When he first went in, he's like, these are just crying around.
Right.
But then he realized that once he realized that if you admit you have an addiction, right?
Right.
Then you're asking for help.
Yeah, and they gave him the principles.
Yeah.
He said the Word of God changed his mindset, but he said the NA and the AA group gave him the principles, gave him the tools. Kind of like what we go through here. These are just life skills. These are some of the tools. Because like I said, but first, we got to have the belief process that we're ready for change. I mean, even like I said, I'm constantly every day in a life skills group. I put myself in a life skills group, whether it's watching a YouTube video, whether it's reading the Bible, whether it's reading a motivational book. Every day, you know, I make sure.
I go to meetings every day.
Yeah, see, there it is. There it is.
I mean, if I skip a day, I feel like a cancer patient that missed his treatment.
And they give you those tools. Yeah, what I'm saying, they give.
That's how I feel.
Yeah, well, they give you the tools, like whether it's on your job, whether it's in family situation.
I can spit it out there. You know what I'm saying? And somebody can tell me their life experience. You know what I'm saying?
So you learn from each other. Yeah. So and that's what's important about those group settings. I mean, even today we're talking, we're hearing other people talk, hearing what you're talking, and I could probably be able to relate to somebody else, maybe at juvenile hall, hearing what you just said.
Well, I know you can relate to a lot what I say because of YA.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Being a youth correctional officer.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And me actually being there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
That's why, like you said about the goals, right? One of my goals is to be a youth mentor.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To be able to talk to troubled youth and try to steer them away from that path. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I've already been there.
So you take that mess, turn it into a message.
Exactly.
And, see that, and that's positive. That's positive.
That's what I'm doing.
And so that's a goal, right? But like you said, he decided, he said, you know, first he had to make that decision, I'm going to be somebody, right? Then he started seeking out the proper resources. And see, once he got the proper resources, he's talking about he charted a course. He had a counselor that laid out a course for him, how to graduate in 3.5 years. Yeah. And he said he followed it to a T. Guess what? It worked, right? And then from then, he went and got his master's degree. And then was able to get his doctorate degree. And then from there, like I said, during that process, I'm sure he continues, even to this day, continues to set forth those goals. But remember, he broke it down. You do it one class at a time. He said, how did I get my degree? Remember, we were just talking about that, one step at a time. You know, inch by inch, everything's a cinch. But what do you say? One class at a time. Because a lot of times you look at, oh, I got to get this big degree, doctorate degree. It's too overwhelming, but you break it up in pieces. What you did, and that, you know, he pointed that out. You broke it up in pieces.
I got two common beliefs, right? One my grandma told me a long time ago.
Yes.
She said you put one foot in front of the other, it always gets you where you're going.
There it is, there.
And
right.
the other one is I don't have bad days. I have good days, and I got learning days.
I like that.
Good day, there's something to learn from that day.
That's right.
And that's where I evaluate my stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, okay, instead of looking at it as a problem, we look at it as a challenge.
Challenge, yeah.
And that would change your whole process. You know, this like we were talking about, you know, you got kids that wake up, or even adults, I have to go to work. You know, but you got some people waking up, I get to go to work. I have to go to school. You got some people waking up, I get to go to school. You know, it's just that half glass, half empty type of mentality. Which one are we going to have? Are we going to be a thermostat? Remember we talked about, are we going to be a thermostat or a thermometer? Now, what do we want to be? A thermostat or a thermometer?
I don't remember that.
Okay.
Thermometer.
Not a thermometer. Thermostat, yeah. Because a thermometer, you just react to everything that's around you, right? If it's hot, you get hot. Everybody acting up, you acting up. Everybody depressed, you act depressed. But the thermostat, you're in control. I'm going to set it to where I want to be. I want to be at 74 degrees. Everybody else want to be at 85. I'm going to 74. Right?
So you're going to be back next Monday?
I'll be back next Monday.
All right,
good class, though, man. Good class. Appreciate y'all. And like I said, we're going to kind of maybe dive in deeper with this. Probably have another video next week. But, you know, these videos kind of help, though, huh? Kind of put everything in perspective. And like I said, we could all relate.
A lot of more, to me, they're motivational.
Yes, right.
Because they're people that's been there where I've been.
There it is. Right.
And it just shows you that if they can do it, you know what I'm saying?
Right. And one thing is, you're doing it.
Yeah.
And all of you are doing it. Yeah. I mean, just coming to this class, you're doing it.
Well, he's helping me out.
Yeah, see?
Get me to speak to some youth. You know?
There it is there. There it is. So, and I remember you talking about that a while back, and see, now you're doing it.
Yeah.
And see, like I said, we got to be proud of just even, you know, the successes we take. Because sometimes we just think, you know, I'll be happy once I get here. But we got to enjoy the, you ever hear, like, just don't enjoy the destination, enjoy the journey.
Yeah. Well, somebody asked me what I liked about this class. I said, you really want to know? I said, everything.
Yeah,
right?
There it is.
I said, if I get nothing else out of this class, I got OSHA 10 training,
right?
And I got first aid CPR.
There it is there.
I mean,
that's right.
Nothing else in this class, I got that.
That's right.
I mean,
that's
I
right.
said, so I've got some kind of benefit out of it.
There it is.
You know? I said, but I've learned way more than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, I can't even explain everything I have learned.
Right.
You know? And
right.
I'm surprised that I could take this much in at the age I am.
Well, see, and like I said, and you're taking that, and like I said, it's going to come into fruition as you talk to those youth at the Boys and Girls Club. Yeah. So, see, already, you know, because you've been speaking it out. I've heard you speak it out weeks ago, and now it's happening.
Yeah.
And just, you know, like I said, every time we like I said, sit down and we talk as a group, I mean, we're all growing, all of us, myself, you know. I'm learning. You know, when I hear you talk, I'm listening, right? Because I'm like, okay, I'm going to use that when I go talk to this kid on Thursday, right? And see, a lot of the curriculum that I have, what am I doing? What are we doing? It's somebody I listened to, but I captured it on video, right? And I bring it to the class, and we discuss it. And as we discuss it, guess what? I get more nuggets out of it because I'm able to hear it from your perspective and your perspective. Yeah, and for myself, because now I'm bringing it to you. Now you're showing me a different side of it. I'm like, okay, I seen the other side, but I didn't hear. You know, you brought a good side out of it and stuff like that. So as the more we discuss it, helps sharpen me to be able to present this. And now you're about to take, you know, you're taking information that you have just from your own life experiences and personal development. Now I'm going to be able to share that out at the Boys and Girls Club.
Iron sharpens iron.
Iron sharpens iron. And that's what we're doing here as a group. We're sharpening each other. Yeah. All right. All right. Iron sharpens iron. All right. Good group, y'all. Appreciate it.
Installs, it's looking closer. I just did some checking in on it, so I'll give you the details.